Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Abigail Thornfield, and I've been crawling through caves for 13 years. I know these limestone tunnels under Daniel Boone National Forest better than most people know their own backyards. The Red River Gorge area has been my second home since I was 18, fresh out of high school and running from the coal dust that killed my daddy. People think being a park ranger is all about campfire safety talks and bear warnings. They don't know about the other part of my job, the part where I squeeze through gaps barely wider than my shoulders, following underground rivers that haven't seen sunlight since the Cherokee walked these ridges above. August 1988 was the worst drought anyone could remember. The streams that usually rushed through the cave systems had dropped to barely a trickle. Water levels I'd never seen before were exposing passages that had been hidden for decades, maybe centuries. That should have been exciting for someone like me, someone who lives to map the unknown. Instead, it made me nervous in a way I couldn't explain. I was sitting in the ranger station that morning, checking my gear for the third time, when old Tom Bradley shuffled in. Tom had lived in these hills his whole life, and his grandmother had been Cherokee. Most folks dismissed his stories as mountain superstition, but I'd learned to listen when Tom got that serious look in his eyes. "You ain't thinking of going down into those new openings, are you, Abby?" He sat down across from my desk, his weathered hands gripping his coffee cup too tight. "It's my job, Tom. These passages need to be surveyed and mapped. Could be dangerous if hikers try to explore them without knowing what's down there." Tom shook his head slowly. "My grandmother used to tell stories about what lives in the deep places. Said there were things down there that guarded the sacred waters, things with teeth and scales and eyes older than the mountains themselves." I'd heard these stories before. Cherokee legends about the Uktena, a giant horned serpent with a crystal in its forehead that could show you the future or drive you mad. Beautiful stories, but stories all the same. In 13 years of cave work, the biggest snake I'd ever seen was a harmless king snake, maybe 4 feet long. "I appreciate the concern, Tom, but I've got a job to do. Besides, if there really was some monster down there, don't you think I would have run into it by now?" The old man stood up, leaving his coffee barely touched. Maybe it wasn't time yet. Maybe the water kept it sleeping. But this drought... He paused at the door. "Just remember, Abby, some things are hidden for a reason." 2 hours later, I was rappelling down into Whispering Cave, one of 3 new entrances the drought had revealed. My headlamp cut through the darkness, showing walls covered in limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls. The air was different down here, stale and heavy, like breathing inside a sealed tomb. I'd been caving long enough to trust my instincts, and right now my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The silence was too complete. Usually, caves had their own sounds, water dripping, air moving through passages, the small scratching sounds of bats or cave crickets. Here there was nothing. Even my own breathing seemed muffled and strange. 40 feet down, my rope went slack as I reached the cave floor. I tested the ground with my boots, making sure it was stable, then unclipped and turned on my backup lights. The chamber stretched away from me in 3 directions, each passage disappearing into darkness that my lights couldn't penetrate. I pulled out my survey notebook and started doing what I'd done hundreds of times before. Measuring, mapping, noting airflow and temperature. Everything seemed normal on paper, but that feeling of wrongness kept growing stronger. It was like being watched, except I knew I was alone. That's when I found the first one, stretched. Across the floor of the eastern passage was a snakeskin shed in one perfect piece. I'd seen plenty of snakeskins before, but nothing like this. It was massive, easily 20 feet long and thick as my waist. The scales caught my headlamp beam and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at too long. I knelt down and touched it carefully. The skin was recent, still flexible, with a strange oily feel that left residue on my gloves. No snake that size existed. Not in Kentucky, not anywhere. The biggest snakes in the world, the anacondas and pythons, might reach 30 feet in perfect conditions, but they didn't live in limestone caves in Appalachian Mountains. I took photos and measurements trying to stay scientific about it. Maybe it was some kind of flood debris, pieces of different skins washed together by high water and dried into one shape. It had to be something like that. The alternative was impossible. But as I worked my way deeper into the cave system, following passages that my instrument said extended for miles underground, I kept finding more evidence that my rational explanations weren't holding up. Scratches in the limestone walls, too regular to be natural erosion, but too big to be made by any known animal. Arrangements of animal bones that looked almost deliberate. And everywhere, that smell, musky and reptilian, like a zoo on a hot summer day. By the time I'd been underground for 6 hours, I had mapped nearly a mile of new passages. My water was running low and my backup batteries were down to half charge, but I'd found something that made all the strangeness worth it. A chamber larger than any I'd ever seen, with formations that took my breath away. The ceiling disappeared beyond my light's reach, and water that had carved this space over millions of years had left behind pillars and walls that looked like a cathedral made of stone. If this could be opened safely to the public, it would be one of the most beautiful show caves in the state. I was setting up my camera to document the discovery when my headlamp flickered and died. I've had lights fail before. It's part of caving, like scraped knees and muddy clothes. You always carry backups and you never panic. Panic gets you killed underground. But when I switched on my first backup light, something was different about the great chamber. In the few seconds of darkness, I could have sworn I'd heard something moving. Not the small, skittering sounds of cave life, but something big sliding across stone. My light beam swept across the chamber, and everything looked the same as it had moments before. The same beautiful formations, the same limestone pillars, the same shallow pools of crystal clear water. But the feeling of being watched had gotten stronger, and now it came with the certainty that I wasn't alone anymore. I turned in a slow circle, letting my light probe every corner I could see. Nothing moved. Nothing made sound. But something had changed, and every instinct I'd developed in 13 years of cave work was telling me to get out. Now. I packed my camera quickly and headed back toward the entrance passage. My route was clearly marked with reflective tape every 50 feet, standard safety procedure that had never failed me. But as I followed my markers back through the passages, I realized I was lost. The passages I'd mapped so carefully were different now. Openings I'd noted as dead ends continued into darkness. Chambers I'd measured and sketched had extra tunnels leading off in directions that hadn't existed before. It was impossible, but the evidence was right there in the beam of my flashlight. I stopped and forced myself to breathe slowly. Getting lost underground kills more cavers than equipment failure or cave-ins. The key is to stake out. Conserve your lights and systematically check every passage until you find your way out. I had enough battery power for maybe 3 more hours if I was careful. Plenty of time to solve this problem. That's when I heard the voice. It came from deeper in the cave system, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell the direction. At first, I thought it might be another caver, someone who'd followed me down through the entrance. I called out, my voice bouncing back from a dozen different passages. "Hello? Is someone there? I'm a park ranger. If you're lost, stay where you are and keep talking." The response wasn't words exactly, more like humming or singing, but in a language I didn't recognize. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the limestone and into my bones. And underneath it, I could hear something else, a sliding, scraping sound like something very large moving through the passages toward me. I turned off my light and listened in the complete darkness that only exists underground. The singing continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, as if the source was moving through the cave system with impossible speed. And that sliding sound was definitely getting closer. When I turned my light back on, there was someone standing at the edge of my beam. It was a woman, maybe 60 years old, with long gray hair and dark skin. She wore clothes that looked handmade, leather and cloth decorated with beadwork and patterns that seemed to move in my light. But her eyes were what stopped my breath. They reflected my headlamp like an animal's, bright and knowing and completely wrong for a human face. "You shouldn't be here, child." Her voice was the one I'd heard echoing through the caves, but now it came from directly in front of me, calm and clear. "The guardian is waking, and it's been hungry for a very long time." "Who are you? How did you get down here?" My training kicked in, even though nothing about this situation made sense. "Are you hurt? Do you need help getting out?" She smiled, and her teeth were too sharp. "I am what my people call a messenger, and you, Abigail Thornfield, are about to learn why some places should remain unmapped." She knew my name. I'd never seen her before in my life, but she knew my name. And she was standing in a cave system that had been sealed by water for decades, maybe centuries, wearing clothes and jewelry that belonged in a museum. "The drought has awakened old things," she continued, taking a step closer. My light showed that she cast no shadow on the cave wall behind her. "Things that have been sleeping in the deep places since your people first came to these mountains. The Uktena stirs in its sacred pools, and it knows you have been mapping its home." I backed away, keeping my light trained on her face. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, lady, but this isn't funny. There are safety protocols for cave exploration, and you're not supposed to be down here without proper equipment and permits. Look around you, child. Look at what your maps have become." I glanced down at my survey notebook, still clutched in my free hand. The pages were blank. Every measurement, every sketch, every note I'd taken during 6 hours of careful work, all of it was gone, as if I'd never written anything at all. When I looked up, the woman was gone, but the sliding sound was much closer now, and my light caught something at the very edge of its range that made my blood freeze. Something massive and serpentine moving through a passage that had been too narrow for anything larger than a raccoon when I'd explored it hours earlier. I ran. My light bounced wildly as I sprinted through passages that changed around me with each step. Openings appeared where solid walls had been. Floors sloped downward into depths that my instruments swore didn't exist. And behind me, gaining fast, something huge followed with a sound like sandpaper on stone. I burst into a chamber I'd never seen before, circular, with walls covered in paintings. Even in my panic, I could tell they were old, ancient. The figures looked like Cherokee art, but the pigments seemed to glow with their own light. They showed people making offerings to a great serpent with antlers like a deer and a crystal blazing in its forehead. In the final painting, the serpent's crystal was dark, and bodies lay scattered around it like broken toys. The sliding sound stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heart hammering and the quick, shallow sound of my breathing. I turned slowly, knowing what I would see, but hoping I was wrong. The thing that filled the passage behind me was impossible. It was a snake, but larger than any living creature had a right to be. Its body was thick as a tree trunk, covered in scales that shifted color in my light. Now black, now green, now the deep red of dried blood. But it was the head that made my sanity try to crawl away and hide. Above eyes like golden coins, a pair of deer antlers spread wide, each point sharp as a spear. And there, set into the serpent's forehead like a third eye, was a crystal the size of my fist. It pulsed with pale light that made the cave paintings seem to move and dance on the walls. The Uktena had found me. The great serpent didn't attack immediately. Instead, it coiled its massive body in the chamber entrance, effectively sealing me inside with nowhere to run. Its golden eyes studied me with an intelligence that was completely, terrifyingly human. When it spoke, the voice came from inside my head rather than from its mouth. "Why do you map the sacred places, daughter of the surface world?" I pressed my back against the painted wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I'm a park ranger. It's my job to make sure the caves are safe for visitors." The crystal in its forehead pulsed brighter, and suddenly I could see the chamber as clearly as if it were lit by sunlight. The paintings on the walls were moving now, telling a story that played out like a movie around and me. I watched Cherokee families bringing offerings to underground pools, saw them receiving visions and prophecies from the great serpent that guarded the sacred waters. For 1,000 years, my people understood the bargain, the voice continued. They took only what they needed from the deep places, and they gave proper thanks for what they received. But your people, take everything. I didn't take anything, I whispered. I was just mapping. I'm trying to protect these places. The serpent's laughter was like rocks grinding together inside my skull. Protect them? By bringing more of your kind down here? By turning sacred spaces into tourist attractions? Images flashed through my mind. Caves I knew well, transformed into commercial attractions with electric lights and paved walkways. Tour groups trampling through chambers that had been pristine for millennia. The natural beauty that drew me to this work turned into profit and entertainment. You map to possess, you catalog to control, and now the sacred waters run low, and I grow hungry. The serpent began to uncoil, its massive body filling more of the chamber. I could see now that its scales weren't just changing color, they were covered in the same symbols as the cave paintings, patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living things. What do you want from me? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I want you to understand what you have disturbed. I want you to see the price of your curiosity. The crystal blazed and the world disappeared. I was standing in the same chamber, but it was filled with water now. Clean, clear water that reflected light from sources I couldn't see. Cherokee families stood around the edges of the pool and children played in the shallows while their parents spoke in low, reverent voices. An old woman, a medicine woman by her dress and bearing, stepped into the deeper water. She carried a bowl made from what looked like turtle shell filled with tobacco and other offerings. The great serpent rose from the depths to meet her, its crystal glowing softly, its golden eyes kind rather than terrible. The woman spoke in Cherokee, words I couldn't understand but could somehow feel the meaning of. She was asking for guidance, for visions to help her people through a hard winter ahead. The serpent lowered its great head, and the crystal touched the water's surface. Images appeared in the pool, scenes of the future, glimpses of what was to come. I saw the Cherokee families moving away from the caves, forced out by soldiers in blue uniforms. I saw the mountains stripped bare by mining and logging. I saw the sacred waters turned bitter with runoff and chemicals. And I saw myself, 13 years old, standing at my father's grave while the preacher talked about black lung and the price of coal. The vision changed. Now I was looking at the cave system as it existed in 1988, dry, exposed, vulnerable. But I could also see it as it had been, as it should be. The underground rivers ran full and clean, supporting blind fish and cave salamanders that existed nowhere else on Earth. The limestone formations grew slowly over millions of years, creating beauty that took your breath away. And I saw what would happen if the drought continued, if development pressure kept growing, if people like me kept mapping every secret place and opening it to the world. The sacred pools would be turned into underground boat tours. The ancient paintings would fade under the glare of electric lights. The creatures that had lived here since before humans walked the earth would disappear forever. Now, do you understand? The serpent's voice was gentler now, sad rather than angry. I am not the monster in this story, daughter. I am the guardian of what remains. The vision faded, and I was back in the chamber, alone with the great serpent and my dying light. But something had changed in me. I could feel it, a connection to this place that went deeper than professional interest or even love of natural beauty. I understood now why Tom's grandmother had told stories about the deep places. They weren't just stories. They were warnings and promises and prayers all rolled into one. What happens now? I asked. That depends on you. You can leave this place and never return. Seal the entrances. Report them as too dangerous for exploration. Let the sacred waters rest undisturbed. And if I don't? The serpent's eyes blazed golden in the darkness. Then you join the bones that line my den, and I find other ways to protect what is mine. But even as it made the threat, I sensed this wasn't really what the Uktena wanted. There was another option, one that neither of us had spoken aloud yet. There's a third choice, isn't there? I said slowly. You're not just a guardian, you're a teacher. The Cherokee came to you for visions, for wisdom. You're offering me the same thing. The great serpent nodded slowly, and for the first time I saw approval in its ancient eyes. The sacred waters are dying, daughter. The old agreements are broken. But new ones can be made if you have the courage to accept the responsibility. My headlamp finally gave out, leaving us in the soft glow of the serpent's crystal. In that strange light, the chamber looked different again. Not prehistoric and alien, but somehow welcoming. The paintings on the walls seemed to be waiting for new stories to be added to their ancient gallery. What kind of responsibility? Become the bridge between the old world and the new. Learn the true names of the deep places and teach your people to respect what they do not understand. Guard the sacred waters as I have guarded them, but guard them in ways your people can accept. It was an impossible offer. It was also the only offer that made sense. The serpent uncoiled further, and I saw that the pact, sage behind it, wasn't blocked anymore. I could leave. I could walk away from this encounter and try to convince myself it had been some kind of hallucination brought on by bad air and stress. I could go back to my old life, my old job, my old understanding of what was possible in the world. Or I could say yes. If I accept, I said carefully, what does that mean exactly? What would I have to do? The Uktena's crystal pulsed, and images began flowing through my mind. Not visions of the past this time, but glimpses of possible futures. I saw myself leading small groups of researchers into the caves, but they weren't tourists or casual explorers. They were scientists, conservationists, people who understood that some places were worth more left alone than developed. I saw myself working with Cherokee elders, learning the old stories and the old ways of asking permission before entering sacred spaces. I saw the cave systems protected not by hiding them, but by helping people understand why they mattered. And I saw myself changed by the work, older, wiser, carrying knowledge that couldn't be written in any survey report or filed with any government agency. The drought will end, the serpent's voice whispered in my mind. The waters will return. But the world above ground grows more hungry every year, more careless with the wild places. They will need a guardian who speaks their language, who understands their laws and their fears. But I'm just a park ranger, I protested. I don't have the authority to protect places like this. I can't make policy or stop development. You underestimate yourself, daughter. You have something more valuable than authority. You have love for these places and the skill to explore them safely, and now you have knowledge of what truly lives in the deep waters. The serpent began to coil around me, not threateningly, but like a living embrace. Its scales were warm to the touch, and up close I could see that they really were covered in symbols, not painted on, but part of the creature's very being. Stories written in living flesh. Histories that went back to the beginning of the world. But first, you must prove that you can be trusted with the old knowledge. You must undergo the test that all guardians have faced since the first human looked into the sacred waters and asked to see the future. What kind of test? Instead of answering, the Uktena lifted its great head and touched the crystal in its forehead to mine. The world exploded into visions. I was flying above the mountains, seeing them as they had been before the first humans arrived. Endless forest, broken only by rivers and clearings where lightning had started fires. I watched the Cherokee come north, following game and good water, learning to live in harmony with the mountains and their hidden places. I saw the arrival of European settlers, the wars and forced removals, the slow destruction of ways of life that had worked for thousands of years. I felt the Uktena's pain as the sacred pools were polluted, as caves were dynamited for easier mining access, as the old agreements between human and serpent were forgotten. But I also saw hope. I saw people like me, people who loved the wild places enough to fight for them. I saw scientists learning to listen to indigenous knowledge, governments slowly understanding that some places were worth more protected than developed. And I saw the other guardians, creatures like the Uktena that still lived in hidden places throughout Appalachia, a great bear in the high peaks of the Smokies, a white deer that appeared only during the worst winters, an owl whose voice could call storms, all of them waiting for humans to remember the old bargains, to learn again how to live as neighbors rather than conquerors. The visions came faster now, overwhelming in their intensity. I saw my own future, not one future, but dozens of possibilities spinning out from this moment. In some, I walked away by and spent the rest of my life wondering if any of it had been real. In others, I stayed and learned the serpent's wisdom, becoming something new, part scientist, part guardian, part bridge between worlds. But in all the futures where I accepted the Uktena's offer, I saw the same thing, the sacred waters running clear again, the deep places protected not by secrecy, but by understanding, and myself old and content with work that mattered more than any paycheck or government position ever could. The crystal's touch burned cold against my forehead, and I felt something changing inside me, new knowledge flowing into my mind like water filling an empty cup. I learned the true names of the caves, the songs that called rain, the ceremonies that kept the underground rivers clean and strong. And I learned the price of that knowledge. Once you accept the guardian's role, the Uktena's voice whispered, you cannot return to your old life unchanged. You will see the world as it truly is, beautiful and terrible, magical and fragile. You will carry responsibilities that you cannot share with those who are not called to this work. Are you prepared for that burden? I thought about my old life, the routine surveys, the paperwork, the endless meetings about budget cuts and personnel changes. I thought about 13 years of loving these mountains but never really understanding them. I thought about Tom's grandmother's stories, dismissed as superstition by people who had never sat in darkness with a creature older than civilization. Yes, I said, and meant it. I'm ready. The Uktena released me from its coils and reared back, its crystal blazing so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. When the light faded, I was alone in the chamber, but I wasn't the same person who had entered it. I could feel the cave system around me like a living thing, could sense the slow movement of water through limestone passages, could hear the whispered songs of creatures I had no names for. And I knew, with absolute certainty, how to get out. The passages led me upward through darkness that no longer felt frightening, past formations that seemed to glow with their own inner light. My backup lights were long dead, but I didn't need them anymore. The Guardian's knowledge showed me the way. I emerged from Whispering Cave into a dawn I hadn't expected to see. The drought had broken during my time underground. Clouds covered the sky, and I could smell rain in the air. As I climbed out of the cave entrance, the first drops began to fall. That was 37 years ago, and I've never regretted the choice I made in the deep places. The work changed, of course. Instead of just mapping caves, I became something new. Part ranger, part researcher, part keeper of stories that most people aren't ready to hear. The official report I filed was simple. Whispering Cave and the two other drought-exposed entrances were deemed too unstable for public access and were sealed pending further geological study. The Cherokee Nation quietly supported the decision, and the entrances were covered with steel grates that look like standard safety measures but carry symbols that older eyes recognize as warnings. But the real work happened in the years that followed. Working with Cherokee elders like Tom Bradley's nephew, I learned the proper protocols for entering sacred spaces. I developed new survey methods that documented geological features without disturbing the spiritual significance of the places we studied. I established research partnerships with universities, bringing in scientists who understood that some knowledge comes with responsibilities attached. We've protected dozens of cave systems throughout Appalachia, not by hiding them, but by helping people understand why they matter. The Uktena and I have an arrangement now. During the dry months when the sacred pools run low, I bring offerings, not the tobacco and sage of Cherokee tradition, but things the Ito'u, ancient guardian, has learned to value. Clean water from protected springs, soil samples that show improving forest health, photos of cave systems that have been successfully preserved for future generations. And sometimes, when the work gets particularly difficult, when I'm fighting developers or politicians or other rangers who think I've gotten too mystical in my old age, I go back to the deep places for guidance. The Uktena is always there, patient and wise, ready to share the long view that comes from living through centuries of change. I've trained others over the years, carefully chosen people who show the right combination of love for wild places and respect for things they don't understand. Some of them have met their own guardians in other mountain ranges, other hidden valleys. The network is growing, slowly but steadily. The world above ground keeps changing, mostly not for the better. Climate change is altering the delicate balance that keeps the underground rivers flowing. Development pressure never stops. New threats emerge faster than we can address the old ones. But the sacred waters still run clear in the places we've learned to protect. The guardians still keep their ancient watch. And sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing survey reports or writing grant applications, I can feel the Uktena's approval like a warm current in the depths of my mind. The young rangers who work with me now think I'm a little eccentric. The old woman who insists on performing strange ceremonies before entering certain caves, who knows things about Appalachian ecology that aren't written in any textbook, who sometimes seems to be listening to voices only she can hear. They're not wrong, but they're learning, slowly, that there's more to this work than mapping passages and filing safety reports. Some of them are beginning to understand that the mountains have their own intelligence, their own purposes, their own ways of choosing who gets to know their secrets. Last month, a young geologist named Sarah Martinez came to me with a story about strange sound in a cave system near the Tennessee border. She described singing that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and formations that appeared to change when she wasn't looking directly at them. I smiled and told her to pack her gear. It sounds like the mountains have chosen another guardian. The work continues. The sacred waters flow. And in the deep places beneath Appalachia, ancient eyes watch over treasures that no amount of money could buy. The last wild places, the old knowledge, the bridges between what was and what might yet be. My name is Abigail Thornfield, and I've been underground in these caves for 50 years now. I've seen things that would make most people question their sanity, and I've learned that the most important truths are the ones that can't be proven to people who aren't ready to believe them. But I've also learned that the world is far more wonderful and terrible than most people imagine, and that there are still guardians keeping watch in the hidden places, waiting for humans wise enough to remember the old bargains. The serpent's tooth marks me still, not a wound, but a gift. The knowledge burns sometimes, especially when I see how carelessly we treat the sacred places. But it also fills me with hope, because I know that the guardians are patient, and the mountains remember everything, and there are still people willing to go into the dark places and learn what needs to be learned. The drought of '88 broke that morning when I emerged from Whispering Cave, and the rains have come regularly ever since, at least to the places where the old agreements are still honored. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when guardians do their job right. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Sarah's waiting for me at the Tennessee Cave, and something tells me we're going to find more than just interesting geology down there. Some depths should stay unmapped, it's true. But some depths are meant to be explored by those who understand that mapping isn't the same as conquering, and that the greatest treasures are the ones we protect rather than possess. The serpent's tooth has left its mark on me, and I wear that mark with pride. My name is Jeremiah Whitlock, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 16 years. I thought I knew every trail, every hollow, every story the old folks tell around their wood stoves on winter nights. But some stories aren't meant to be just stories. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy worked the mines before the government made this place a park. 3 generations of Whitlocks watching over these hills. The mountains are in my blood, which is why what happened in Deadfall Hollow shook me so bad. It was March of 1983 when Sarah Jane Morrison went missing. 23 years old, experienced hiker from Knoxville. Her family called it in when she didn't show up for work Monday morning. She'd been planning a weekend solo trip to photograph the early wildflowers. Smart girl, they said. Careful. Not the type to take stupid risks. I remember that weekend clear as day. The weather had been acting strange all week. Warm air was sitting heavy over cold ground, making fog thicker than pea soup in the low places. We call it a temperature inversion. Makes the mountains look like islands floating in white clouds. Pretty to look at, but it can mess with your head if you're not used to it. Sarah's car was parked at the Cataract Falls trailhead, 18 miles from the nearest road. Her permit said she was planning to camp near the old mining settlement in Deadfall Hollow. Not many folks go back there anymore. The trail's grown over, and there's nothing left but stone foundations and a few rusted mine shafts the government sealed up years ago. I radioed my partner Tommy Caldwell and told him I'd handle this one myself. Standard procedure for a missing hiker. Check the obvious spots first. Water sources, shelter areas, anywhere someone might set up camp. Most of the time, people just get turned around or sleep late. They show up hungry and embarrassed, but fine. The hike into Deadfall Hollow takes about 3 hours if you know the old deer trails. The official path stopped being maintained in the 70s, but I'd been back there plenty of times over the years. Hunters sometimes got lost chasing wounded deer. Teenagers thought the abandoned settlement was spooky fun. Every few years, some college kids would get the bright idea to explore the mine shafts, and we'd have to fish them out. The hollow got its name for good reason. It's shaped like a funnel, with steep ridges on 3 sides and only one way in or out. The old-timers say it's where things go to die. Deadfall, trees that come down in storms and never rot away proper. Just pile up until the whole place feels like a graveyard. My grandmother used to tell stories about that place. Said the Cherokee had warnings about certain hollows where the spirits got confused, places where people went in but didn't come out the same. Of course, Grandma told a lot of stories. Fetch creatures that could steal your face. Shadow people that lived in mine shafts. I figured it was just mountain talk, the kind of tales that keep kids from wandering off alone. That morning I packed my usual gear. Silva compass, topographic maps, first aid kit, extra food and water. My radio was a Motorola HT-220, reliable as sunrise, though the mountains could make it temperamental. I had my .357 service revolver, though I'd never drawn it on a search and rescue. Mountain lions would run from noise, and bears were still sleeping off winter. The fog was hanging thick when I started up the trail. Not unusual for March, but something felt different. The woods were too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrels chattering, not even the buzz of insects starting to wake up for spring, just the sound of my boots on wet leaves and my own breathing. About an hour in, I stopped to see too. Heck, my compass. The needle was wobbling more than it should, but I figured it was mineral deposits in the rocks. These mountains are full of iron ore. Sometimes it throws instruments off a little. That's when I first felt it. The feeling that something was watching me. You know that prickle on the back of your neck when someone's staring at you? It was like that, but stronger. Like whatever was watching wasn't quite human. I told myself it was just nerves. 16 years of search and rescue, and I'd never spooked myself on a routine call. But Deadfall Hollow had always felt different from the rest of the park. Older, heavier, like the mountains were holding their breath. I found Sarah's campsite around noon, tucked into a clearing near what used to be the main settlement. Her blue tent was still standing, but the flap was open and flapping in the breeze. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. Experienced campers always zip their tents, keeps the bugs out. I called out her name a few times, thinking maybe she was off taking pictures or answering nature's call. When nobody answered, I moved in closer to look around. The campsite looked like someone had left in a hurry. Her sleeping bag was half out of the tent, still warm to the touch. A cup of coffee sat by the cold campfire, only half finished. But here's what really bothered me. Her hiking boots were sitting side by side about 10 feet from the tent, like she'd stepped right out of them and walked away barefoot. Who takes off their boots in the middle of nowhere and leaves them behind? I keyed my radio to call it in, but all I got was static. Not unusual. The hollow was deep, and radio signals don't travel well through thick forest. I'd have to hike back up to the ridge to get a clear signal. But first, I needed to search the immediate area. Standard procedure is to work in expanding circles from the last known position. Look for tracks, broken branches, anything that might show which way the person went. The ground around the campsite was soft from recent rain, perfect for holding footprints. I found Sarah's boot prints easy enough, size 7, waffle sole pattern. They led from her tent toward the tree line, then just stopped, like she'd walked about 30 yards and vanished into thin air. I widened my search, looking for any sign she'd wandered off in the night. Maybe she'd gotten up to use the bathroom and gotten turned around in the fog. It happens more than you'd think, especially when people are camping alone and wake up disoriented. That's when I found the other footprints. They were human, about the same size as Sarah's, but barefoot. The prints were strange, too deep for someone Sarah's weight, like whoever made them was carrying something heavy. They led from where her boot prints ended, straight toward the old mine entrance about a quarter-mile away. The mine shaft had been sealed with a steel grate back in the 60s, after a couple of kids nearly fell in. But when I got there, the grate was standing wide open. The metal was old and rusted, but it would take serious strength to bend those bars like that. I shined my flashlight into the opening. The shaft angled down into darkness, with rotting wooden support timbers and rails for the old ore cars. The air coming out smelled like sulfur and something else, something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. "Sarah!" I called into the mine. My voice echoed back strange, like the sound was being stretched and twisted. "Sarah Morrison! Can you hear me?" Nothing. Just the sound of water dripping somewhere deep in the mountain. I should have gone back for backup right then. Should have hiked up to the ridge, called in the situation, waited for a proper cave rescue team. But I kept thinking about those barefoot prints and how scared Sarah must be if she was trapped down there in the dark. I had rope in my pack and a good flashlight. The first part of the mine looked stable, enough. I could at least go down a little ways, see if there were any signs she'd been there. The wooden ladder built into the shaft wall was rotten, but the metal rungs seemed solid. Tied off my rope to a tree and started down, testing each step careful-like. The air got colder as I descended, and that sweet rotten smell got stronger. About 20 feet down, my flashlight beam caught something that made me freeze. Scratched into the wooden support beam, fresh as yesterday, were the words, "Help me," in shaky letters. Below that, "They have my face." What the hell did that mean? I called Sarah's name again, louder this time. This time, I got an answer. "Jerry?" The voice came from deeper in the mine, weak and scared. "Jerry, is that you?" It was Sarah's voice, no doubt about it. But how did she know my name? Her family had talked to the office when they reported her missing, but I'd never met her before. "Sarah, where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm here, Jerry. I'm so cold. They took my boots. They took my—" "Oh God, Jerry, don't let them take yours." Her voice was coming from the main tunnel, maybe 50 yards in. I could see my flashlight beam reflecting off the old rails that ran along the tunnel floor. The support timbers looked bad, but the shaft seemed stable enough. "I'm coming, Sarah. Stay where you are. Don't try to move." I started down the tunnel, following the rails. My boots crunched on loose gravel, and somewhere ahead I could hear Sarah crying. Soft little sobs that echoed off the stone walls. But the closer I got, the more something felt wrong. The crying didn't sound quite right. It was too regular, like someone pretending to cry. And that sweet rotten smell was getting so strong, it made my stomach turn. "Sarah, talk to me. Are you injured?" "I'm here, Jerry." Her voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet ahead. Right here. Can't you see me? I swept my flashlight beam ahead and caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was sitting against the tunnel wall, hunched over with long hair covering their face. Wearing Sarah's clothes. The greens, jacket and jeans described in her missing person report. Thank God, I said, hurrying forward. Sarah, we need to get you out of here. Can you walk? She lifted her head, and I saw her face in my flashlight beam. It was Sarah Morrison, no question. Same brown eyes, same heart-shaped face, same scar on her chin from when she fell off her bike as a kid. Details her family had given us. She was smiling at me, but something about that smile made my skin crawl. Hello, Jerry, she said. I've been waiting for you. How do you know my name, Sarah? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Something was very wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Your name tag, she said, pointing at my chest. But I wasn't wearing a name tag. Never did on backcountry patrols. I looked down for just a second, and when I looked back up, she was gone. The tunnel ahead was empty except for the old mine rails disappearing into darkness. Sarah, I called, swinging my flashlight around. Where did you go? No answer. But I could hear footsteps somewhere in the tunnels, moving away from me. Not the careful steps of someone injured or scared, but quick, confident steps like someone who knew these tunnels well. I followed the sound deeper into the mine, past rusty equipment and rotting support timbers. The main tunnel branched off in several directions, and I started to worry about getting lost myself. But I could still hear those footsteps ahead, always just around the next corner. That's when I found the first body. It was wedged into a side tunnel, dried out like old leather. The clothes looked old, maybe from the 70s, judging by the style. A young man with a backpack, like he'd been hiking when something got him. But here's what made my blood run cold. He had no face, just smooth skin where his features should have been. I backed away fast, my heart hammering. This wasn't a missing hiker case anymore. This was something else entirely. Jerry, Sarah's voice came from behind me. I spun around, and there she was again, standing maybe 10 feet away, still smiling that wrong smile. Sarah, we need to leave. Now. There's something bad down here. I know, she said. I've been here for days, Jerry, learning about you, about your family, about your brother who died in the mine accident when you were 12. I never told anyone in the Park Service about Danny. How could she know about my brother? Your grandmother told such interesting stories, Sarah continued, taking a step closer. About the fetch creatures, the hollow people. She was right, you know. We do live in the mines. We do take faces. I reached for my radio, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. Still nothing but static. Don't be afraid, Jerry. It doesn't hurt. Much. We just borrow what we need. Your memories, your appearance, your life. You'll still be here, in a way. Part of us. That's when I noticed her reflection on the wet tunnel wall. In my flashlight beam, Sarah cast a shadow. But the shadow wasn't human. It was tall and thin, with long arms that ended in claws, and no face at all. I ran. Behind me, Sarah laughed, but it wasn't her laugh anymore. It was something else wearing her voice like a mask. I heard other sounds too. Footsteps, lots of them, coming from different directions, like a whole crowd of people moving through the tunnels. I made it back to the main shaft, but when I looked up, the opening seemed impossibly far away. My rope was still hanging there, but it looked different somehow, frayed and old, like it had been there for years. I started climbing anyway, hand over hand, trying not to think about what I'd seen, about the faceless body, about Sarah's reflection that wasn't Sarah at all. Halfway up, I heard voices calling from below. Jerry, don't leave us. It was Sarah's voice. Son, where are you going? That was my father's voice, though Dad had been dead 3 years. Danny's waiting for you, Jer. My brother's voice, exactly like I remembered from when we were kids. I looked down and saw them standing at the bottom of the shaft. Sarah, my father, in his old ranger uniform, and Danny, still 12 years old like the day he died. all looking up at me with those same wrong smiles. "Come back down, Jerry," Sarah said. "We have so much to show you." I climbed faster, not looking down anymore. Behind me, I could hear them starting up the ladder. Their footsteps on the metal rungs sounded too heavy, like they weighed more than they should. I made it out of the mine shaft and kept running, crashing through the undergrowth toward Sarah's campsite. Maybe if I got her gear, I could prove to someone what had happened. Maybe the authorities would believe me. But when I got to the clearing, the campsite was gone. No tent, no sleeping bag, no coffee cup. Just empty forest like nobody had ever been there. And standing in the middle of the clearing was Sarah Morrison, perfectly normal looking, wearing clean hiking clothes and expensive boots. "Jerry," she called out, waving like she was happy to see me. "Thank goodness you found me. I got so turned around in this fog. I've been wandering around for hours." She looked exactly like the photos her family had provided. Same clothes, same backpack, same everything. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen in the mine, I would have believed she was the real Sarah Morrison. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my distance. "I went for a morning hike to take some pictures, and I got lost when the fog rolled in. I've been trying to find my way back to the campsite. You must think I'm such an amateur." She sounded normal, scared but trying to be brave, embarrassed about getting lost. Everything you'd expect from someone in her situation. But I kept thinking about her reflection in the mine tunnel, about the faceless body, about the voices calling my name from the darkness. "Show me your campsite," I said. "What do you mean? This is it." She gestured around the empty clearing. "Well, I packed everything up this morning before I left. I was planning to hike out today." "Where's your gear?" "In my car, of course, down at the parking area." "Jerry, you're acting strange. Are you feeling all right?" My radio crackled to life. "Base to Whitlock. Come in, Jerry." I keyed the mic with shaking hands. "This is Whitlock. I found Sarah Morrison. We're heading out." "Copy that. Good work. Family will be relieved." Sarah smiled at me, and this time it looked genuine, normal, like maybe I'd imagined everything in the mine. "See?" she said. "Everything's fine. Let's get out of here. This place gives me the creeps." We started hiking toward the trailhead. Sarah chatted about her photography, about growing up in Knoxville, about her job at the hospital. All the details matched what her family had told us. But as we walked, I noticed things. She never stumbled, even on rough terrain. Her boots never seemed to pick up mud, no matter how wet the ground was. And when I looked sideways at her, sometimes her shadow seemed wrong. Too tall, too thin. "Jerry," she said, after we'd been walking for about an hour, "can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about your brother, about Danny?" My blood went cold. I stopped walking. "How do you know about Danny?" Sarah turned around, and for just a second her face looked different, blank, empty. Then she smiled that normal smile again. "Your grandmother told me, of course. When I was a little girl, she used to babysit me sometimes. She told me all about the Whitlock family, about the mining accident, about the stories she heard from the Cherokee. That was impossible. My grandmother had died when I was 15. She'd never babysat for anyone named Morrison." "You're not Sarah," I said, backing away from her. Her smile never wavered. "Of course I am, Jerry. Who else would I be?" But as she said it, her voice changed slightly. Still Sarah's voice, but with something else underneath. Something older and hungrier. "I know what you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My grandmother told me the stories, about the fetch creatures, about things that live in the mines and steal people's faces." Sarah tilted her head, still smiling. But the smile was getting wider, stretching beyond what human lips could do. "Your grandmother was a wise woman, Jerry. She knew the old warnings. But she never told you the whole truth, did she?" The fog was getting thicker around us, rolling up from the hollow like smoke. In the growing mist, Sarah's outlines started to blur and shift. "We don't steal faces, Jerry. We preserve them. Every person who comes into our hollow becomes part of us forever. Their memories, their experiences, their entire lives, they live on through us. What happened to the real Sarah Morrison? She's here, the thing said, and Sarah's voice cracked like old wood. She's part of us now. Would you like to speak with her? Sarah's face went blank for a moment, like someone had erased it. Then her features reformed, but different. Terrified. "Help me," she whispered. And this time it sounded like the real Sarah. "Please, don't let them take you too. They're in the mine. All of them. Everyone who ever disappeared in these mountains. They're still alive, but wrong." "How many?" I asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. Going back to when the Cherokee first warned people about this place. They feed on our memories, our experiences. That's how they learn to mimic us so well." Sarah's face went blank again, then reformed into that wrong smile. "Thank you for that, Sarah," the creature said in its stolen voice. "She's been very helpful. Now, Jerry, it's time for you to join us." The fog was so thick now I could barely see 10 feet in any direction, but I could hear them. Footsteps all around us, moving through the mist. Voices calling my name, me in familiar tones. My father, my brother, other rangers I'd worked with over the years. "We know you, Jerry Whitlock," the Sarah thing said. "We know about your guilt over Danny's death. How you think you should have stopped him from playing in that mine shaft. We know about your drinking problem, the divorce, the nights you sit alone wondering what your life was worth." Each word hit like a physical blow. Things I'd never told anyone, private shames and fears. "We can take all that pain away," it continued. "You'll be part of something larger. All your memories will live on through us. Isn't that better than dying alone and forgotten?" I reached into my pack and pulled out the emergency flares I always carried for night rescues. The creatures in the fog hissed and drew back when I cracked one open. Bright red light cut through the mist, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They looked like people I'd known, but wrong. My father, too tall and thin. Danny with adult teeth in his child's mouth. Sarah Morrison, but her limbs were too long, her fingers ending in black claws. "Light," I said, understanding. "That's why you live in the mines. You can't stand bright light." I lit another flare and started running toward where I thought the trail should be. Behind me, the creatures followed, but they kept their distance from the red glow. I had maybe 10 minutes before the flares burned out. The fog played tricks with direction. Every tree looked the same. Every slope led deeper into the hollow instead of out. I was running in circles while my light sources slowly died. That's when I remembered my grandmother's other stories. About the Cherokee warnings. About iron and bright light and running water. The old mining settlement had been built around a creek. If I could find that creek and follow it downstream, it would lead me out of the hollow. I changed direction, listening for the sound of water over the whispers and footsteps following me in the fog. The creatures were getting bolder as my flares dimmed, moving closer, reaching out with those too lone arms. Finally, I heard it. Water running over stones. I crashed through the undergrowth and found the creek, just a narrow stream, but moving fast with snowmelt. The creatures stopped at the water's edge. "Smart boy," the Sarah thing said, "but you can't stay by the water forever, and we're very patient. We've been waiting in these mountains for a long time." I had one flare left, one chance. I remembered seeing old mining equipment scattered around the settlement ruins, carbide lamps, the kind miners used before electric lights, if any of them still had calcium carbide in them. I followed the creek upstream, staying in the shallow water while the creatures paced along the banks. They couldn't cross running water, but they could wait. There, rusted mining equipment half buried in the creek bed. I dove for the carbide lamp, praying it still had fuel. My last flare was almost dead. The lamp was old but intact. I twisted the valve, heard the hiss of acetylene gas, and struck a spark with my lighter. Pure white flame shot out, brighter than the sun. The creatures screamed and fled back into the fog, but not before I saw their true forms. Tall, thin shadows with no faces, reaching arms that ended in claws. The light revealed something else, too. Bodies in the creek. Dozens of them. perfectly preserved in the cold mountain water. All the missing hikers and hunters from over the years, their faces gone, their memories stolen. I followed the creek downstream, keeping the carbide lamp burning. The fog began to thin as I got farther from the hollow, and eventually I could see the trail markers again. It took me 4 hours to hike out to the parking area. When I got there, Sarah Morrison's car was gone. According to the rangers at the station, her family had picked it up 3 days ago after she called to say she'd decided to cut her trip short. But I knew better. I knew what was driving her car now, what was living in her apartment, working her job, talking to her family. The thing in the hollow had gotten what it wanted after all. They did an investigation, of course, found the mine shaft with the bent grate, the bodies in the creek, evidence of multiple disappearances going back decades. Federal agents came in, sealed off the entire area, claimed geological instability from old mining operations. But I know the truth. Those creatures are still down there, waiting for the next lone hiker, the next curious explorer. And Sarah Morrison, or the thing wearing her face, is still out there in the world, living her life better than she ever did. I tried to contact her family once, just to be sure. Called the number they'd given us when she was reported missing. Sarah answered the phone. "Hello, Jerry," she said before I could speak. "How nice to hear from you. You remember me?" "Of course. You saved my life. I'll never forget that kindness." She sounded normal, happy even. Maybe her family never noticed the difference. Maybe the creature was doing a better job of being Sarah Morrison than Sarah ever had. I hung up without saying anything else. I requested a transfer after that. Couldn't stand the thought of working those mountains anymore, knowing what was waiting in the deep places. They gave me a post in a nice, safe state park in Virginia. Mostly family camping and nature walks. But I still have dreams about Deadfall Hollow, about voices calling my name from dark tunnels, about shadows with no faces reaching for me with clawed hands. And sometimes, on foggy nights, I wonder about all the other hollow places in these ancient mountains, all the other mines and caves where things might be waiting. How many Sarah Morrisons are out there, living borrowed lives? The Cherokee were right to warn people about certain places. Some hollows are meant to stay empty. Some doors should stay closed. I never did stop drinking entirely, but I drink less now. And I never hike alone anymore. Never camp in places too far from help. Because I know the truth that my grandmother tried to tell me all those years ago. The mountains remember everything. Every person who ever walked these ridges. Every life that ended in the dark places below. And sometimes, on nights when the fog rolls thick through the valleys, I think I can hear them calling. All the faces they've stolen. All the lives they've borrowed. Still waiting in the hollow places, where the light never reaches. If you ever find yourself hiking alone in the Appalachian Mountains, remember this story. Stay on marked trails. Don't explore abandoned mines or settlements. And if the fog rolls in thick and strange, if you hear voices calling your name from the darkness, don't answer. Some things are better left buried in the mountains, but they never really stay buried, do they? They just wait. My name is Ezekiel Grayson, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. I've seen bears charge, watched lightning split ancient oaks, and tracked wounded animals through miles of thick woods. I thought I knew every sound these mountains could make. I was wrong. It was June 1985 when I first heard the singing in Bone Hollow. I was stationed at Mount Rogers in Jefferson National Forest, Virginia, 12 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that wound through dense rhododendron tunnels. My job was studying wildlife and keeping the ecosystem healthy. I loved the work. After dropping out of seminary school 23 years earlier, I found God better in the wilderness than I ever did in any church. That particular June was strange from the start. We had a killing frost that came way too late in the season. It hit the mountain laurel hard. Those beautiful white and pink flowers that usually bloom thick as cotton in early summer just withered and died overnight. The rhododendrons suffered too. In my research notes, I wrote that it looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to the mountainside. I was living alone in a small research cabin, spending my days collecting plant samples and recording weather data. My nearest neighbor was old Tom Hartley, who lived in a trailer about 8 miles down the mountain. Sometimes hikers passed through, but mostly it was just me and the forest. The first sign something was really wrong came when I noticed the silence. You have to understand, a healthy forest is never truly quiet. There's always something chirping, buzzing, rustling. Even at night you hear owls, night birds, small animals moving through the underbrush. But in the areas where the frost damage was worst, there was nothing. No insects, no birds. Even the mice seemed to avoid those spots. I figured it was just the ecosystem recovering from the unusual weather. Plants die, food sources disappear, animals move to better areas. It made sense. Everything in nature has a logical explanation. That's what my biology training taught me, and what 19 years in these woods had proven over and over. But the silence felt different. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. The affected area formed an almost perfect circle about half a mile across, centered on a clearing I'd never paid much attention to before. The locals called it Bone Hollow, though I never knew why until later. It was just another open space in the woods to me, maybe 2 acres of grass surrounded by thick rhododendron bushes that grew so dense they formed natural walls. On June 15th, I decided to do a proper survey of the damage. I loaded my backpack with soil testing equipment, sample bags, and my recording gear. I wanted to document the plant die-off properly, maybe figure out if it was disease, contamination, or just the weird weather. The hike to Bone Hollow took about 40 minutes from my cabin, following an old deer trail that twisted through the rhododendron tunnels. These bushes grow thick in the Appalachians, sometimes 15 feet tall, with branches that tangle together overhead like a green roof. Walking through them is like moving through natural hallways. As I got closer to the clearing, my recording equipment started acting up. The microphones picked up a strange, low humming sound, too deep to hear properly, but strong enough to make the needles on my meters dance. I checked all the connections, changed batteries, even smacked the side of the recorder a few times. Nothing helped. When I finally pushed through the last wall of rhododendrons and stepped into Bone Hollow, the humming stopped. The clearing was worse than I'd thought. Every single plant was dead, not just dying, but gray and brittle like they'd been dead for months instead of days. The grass crunched under my boots like autumn leaves. Even the moss on the rocks had turned black. But what really caught my attention were the patterns. The dead. Vegetation wasn't random. It formed rough circles within the larger circle, and lines that connected the circles, like someone had drawn a giant geometric design using dead plants as their pencil. In the center of the clearing sat a ring of old stones, maybe 8 feet across, that I'd never noticed before. I spent the next 3 hours taking soil samples and recording measurements. The pH levels were normal, no radiation, no obvious contamination. According to every test I could run, the soil was perfectly healthy, but everything that tried to grow in it was dead. As evening approached, I packed up my gear and headed back to the cabin. I had a lot of data to analyze, and I was looking forward to a hot dinner and a chance to think through what I'd seen. I was almost back to the main trail when I heard it for the first time. Singing. It was faint, coming from the direction of Bone Hollow. Male voices, maybe 4 or 5 of them, harmonizing in a way that made my chest ache. The melody was sad and beautiful, like an old hymn I couldn't quite remember. I stopped walking and listened. The music swelled and faded, carried on the evening breeze. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, and it was coming from a place where I knew there was nobody. I stood on that trail for 10 minutes, listening to voices that shouldn't exist. The smart thing would have been to keep walking back to my cabin, write up my plant samples, and forget about phantom music in an empty clearing. That's what the rational part of my brain kept saying. But 19 years in these mountains had taught me that unexplained sounds usually had simple explanations. Maybe there were hikers camping in the area. Maybe sound was carrying from somewhere else. Voices can travel strange distances in mountain terrain, especially at dusk when the air gets thick. I set down my pack and pulled out my flashlight. The sun was setting, but I had enough light to make it back to Bone Hollow and solve this mystery. The singing grew stronger as I retraced my steps through the rhododendron tunnels. By the time I reached the edge of the clearing, it was loud enough that I should have been able to see whoever was making it. But when I pushed through the bushes, the clearing was empty. The music kept going. 4 distinct male voices, singing in perfect harmony. The melody was unlike anything I'd heard before. Not quite a church hymn, not quite a folk song, but something that felt ancient and sorrowful. The words weren't clear, but the emotion was. These voices were singing about loss, about being forgotten, about pain that wouldn't end. I walked to the center of the clearing, turning in a slow circle with my flashlight beam sweeping the area. Nobody there. The rhododendron walls were too thick to hide in, and I'd have heard anyone trying to move through them. But the singing continued, seeming to come from all around me at once. My recording equipment was going crazy. The meters were jumping like they were picking up a rock concert, but when I played back the recording later, there was nothing but static and that low humming sound. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insects, no small animals moving in the brush. Just me standing in a dead circle of earth, feeling like the world was watching me. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Nothing. Finally, I headed back to my cabin, but I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way. That night, I couldn't focus on my research notes. I kept thinking about those voices, how perfect the harmony had been, how the sadness in the music seemed to reach right into my chest and squeeze. I'd grown up in church before my crisis of faith in seminary. I knew good singing wildness, and I heard it, and this had been extraordinary. Over the next 3 days, I returned to Bone Hollow each evening. Every time the singing started just as darkness fell. Every time the clearing was empty. And every time my equipment recorded nothing but electronic interference. On the 4th night, I brought my camera. The singing began as usual, but this time I was ready. I snapped pictures in every direction, using the flash to illuminate the clearing in sudden bright bursts. Most of the photos showed nothing unusual, just dead grass, the ring of stones, and the wall of rhododendrons. But in one picture, taken toward the eastern edge of the clearing, I caught something that made my hands shake. Shapes. Human-shaped shadows that weren't attached to anything that could cast them. 4 figures standing in a line, their mouths open as if singing, but their bodies were translucent, like smoke given form. I stared at that photograph for an hour, checking and rechecking it under my desk lamp. There was no mistake. I had photographed something that shouldn't exist. The next morning, I drove into town to visit the local library. If there were stories about Bone Hollow, I wanted to hear them. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, knew every bit of local history. "Bone Hollow?" she said when I asked. "Oh, you don't want to be going there, especially not at night. That's where they buried the soldiers." "What soldiers?" "Civil War. Confederate boys who got caught in a snowstorm up there in November 1863. Whole company of them took shelter in that clearing when the weather turned bad. The storm lasted 4 days. When folks found them, they were all frozen to death." She led me to a section of local history books. They buried them right where they died. No proper cemetery, no headstones, just a mass grave covered with stones. The families never knew where their boys ended up. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Has anyone ever reported strange things happening there?" Mrs. Patterson gave me a long look. "Mister, people have been hearing, singing in Bone Hollow for over 100 years. My great-grandmother used to say it was the soldiers still calling for their mothers." She paused. "Most folks know better than to go there after dark." That evening, I returned to the clearing with new understanding. As the sun set and the singing began, I stood at the edge of the stone circle and spoke to the empty air. "I know who you are," I said. "I know what happened to you." The singing faltered, then continued, but softer now, more mournful. "You're the Confederate soldiers, the ones who died in the storm." This time the music stopped completely. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made every hair on my neck stand up. Footsteps, multiple sets of them moving through the dead grass toward me, but I couldn't see anyone. The footsteps circled me slowly, crunching through the brittle grass. I stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as invisible presences moved around the stone circle. My flashlight beam cut through empty air, but the sounds were clear. Boot heels on hard ground, at least 4 different gates, coming from every direction. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, like evening cooling. All at once, like someone had opened a freezer door. My breath started fogging, and frost began forming on the dead grass at my feet. In June, in Virginia. "We're still here," a voice whispered right next to my ear. I spun around, flashlight beam sweeping wildly, but there was nobody, just my own voice echoing back from the rhododendron walls. "Still waiting," said another voice from behind me now. "Still cold," came a third, so close I should have felt breath on my neck. I ran. Not proud of it, but I ran like my life depended on it. Through the rhododendron tunnels, branches tearing at my clothes, flashlight beam jumping crazily ahead of me. Behind me, I heard laughter. Not mean or scary, just sad, as like they understood why I was afraid. Back at my cabin, I locked the door and sat at my desk, hands shaking as I tried to write up what had happened. But every time I put pen to paper, the words looked insane. Forest ranger reports voices and footsteps from invisible soldiers. They'd transfer me to a desk job or worse. That night, I dreamed about the Civil War. I was there in the clearing, but it wasn't dead and empty. Snow was falling thick and fast, and 4 young men in gray uniforms were huddled around a small fire that wasn't giving off nearly enough heat. They were singing to keep their spirits up, but their lips were turning blue and their eyes were getting glassy. I woke up knowing their names. James, barely 18, who missed his mother's cooking. Thomas, 22, engaged to a girl back in Richmond. Samuel, 19, who played fiddle before the war. And William, the oldest at 24, trying to keep the others' spirits up, even as he felt the cold creeping into his bones. How did I know this? I had no idea. But the knowledge sat in my head as clear as my own memories. For the next week, I avoided Bone Hollow completely. I worked on other sections of the forest, filed reports about everything except the dead clearing, and tried to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But every night, I dreamed about those boys dying in the snow. And every morning, my recording equipment showed the same thing. Those deep, subsonic frequencies were getting stronger. Whatever was happening in Bone Hollow was affecting a larger and larger area. The circle of dead vegetation was growing, expanding outward by a few feet each day. On June 25th, old Tom Hartley called me on the radio. "Zeke, you need to get down here." His voice crackled through the static. "Something's wrong with my animals." I found Tom standing in his yard, staring at his 3 dogs. They were all facing uphill toward Bone Hollow, whimpering and trembling. They'd been like that for 2 days, he said. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't come inside, just stood there staring and shaking. "Yo, you been up to that hollow lately?" Tom asked. "The one they call Bone?" "Why?" "Because something's stirring up there. Can feel it in the air like a storm coming, but it ain't weather." He spit tobacco juice into the dirt. "My daddy told me stories about that place. Said some things are better left alone." That night the singing was different, louder, more desperate. And it wasn't coming just from Bone Hollow anymore. I could hear it from my cabin, carried on the wind like a call for help. I had to go back. This time, I brought more than a flashlight and camera. I packed my first aid kit, emergency flares, and a 2-way radio, though I doubted it would work once I got close to the clearing. I also brought something else. A small wooden cross my mother had given me when I left for seminary. I wasn't sure what I believed about God anymore, but I was starting to think I might need all the help I could get. The clearing looked different in the moonlight. The stone circle seemed larger somehow, and the pattern of dead vegetation was more complex. Geometric designs that hurt to look at directly, like optical illusions made of decay. But the biggest change was the soldiers themselves. I could see them now. 4 young men in Confederate gray, standing at the cardinal points around the stone circle. They weren't solid. I could see right through them to the rhododendrons beyond. But they were definitely there. James, Thomas, Samuel, and William, just like in my dreams. They were singing, mouths open in perfect harmony, but their eyes were fixed on me. "You came back," William said, his voice carrying despite the distance between us. "We knew you would," added Samuel. "We've been waiting so long," said Thomas. "So very long," whispered James. I stepped forward into the circle of stones. The moment my foot crossed the line, the temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath steam, in the moonlight. "What do you want?" I asked. "To be remembered," they said in unison, their voices blending like a chord. "To be found. To rest. I remember you now. I know your names, how you died." "But nobody else does," William said sadly. "Nobody knows we're here. Nobody mourns us. Nobody marks our graves." The singing resumed, but now I could hear the words clearly. It wasn't a hymn or a folk song. It was their story, told in 4-part harmony. How they'd gotten separated from their unit during a retreat. How the storm caught them with no shelter. How they'd died one by one, singing to comfort each other until the cold took their voices forever. "We can't leave," Samuel explained during a pause in the music. "Not until someone bears witness. Not until someone tells our story." "I'll tell it," I promised. "I'll make sure people know." They smiled at that, but it was a sad smile. "It's not enough," Thomas said gently. "We need proper burial, Christian burial, with prayers and recognition." "Where are your bodies?" "Under the stones," James pointed to the circle around me. "But the hollow is hungry now. It's been feeding on our sorrow for so long that it's grown strong. It wants more." As if summoned by his words, the ground beneath my feet began to vibrate. The geometric patterns in the dead vegetation started to glow with a faint, sickly light. And from somewhere deep underground I heard a sound like breathing, slow, ancient, and utterly alien. "Run," William said urgently. "It knows you're here now. It wants to add your voice to ours." The breathing sound grew louder, and the ground under the stone circle started to crack. Through the gaps, I saw something that made my sanity reel. A vast, dark space filled with bones that glowed with the same sick light as the vegetation patterns. Not just 4 soldiers' worth of bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged in complex spirals and circles, all humming with that subsonic frequency that had been driving my equipment crazy. "My God," I whispered. "God abandoned this place long ago," sad. A new voice. Deeper, older, and definitely not human. The 4 soldiers looked terrified. They started backing away from the stone circle as something began rising from the cracked earth. It wasn't solid like they were, it was more like a shadow with weight, darkness that moved with purpose. "We tried to warn you," William said, his voice growing fainter. "The hollow feeds on sorrow, on death, on forgotten souls. We've been keeping it satisfied with our own endless grief, but it's growing stronger. It wants new voices for its choir." The thing rising from the ground was massive, a writhing column of shadow and bone that towered over the clearing. I could see faces in its surface, dozens of them, all twisted in expressions of eternal anguish, and I could hear them singing, a chorus of the damned that made the soldiers' beautiful harmonies sound like a whisper. "You will join us," the entity spoke with a voice like grinding stone. "Your sorrow will feed us. Your voice will strengthen our song." I stumbled backward, but the rhododendron walls had changed. They were taller now, and completely solid, no gaps, no way through. The clearing had become a prison. "There is no escape," the entity continued. "Just as there was no escape for the soldiers, no escape for the travelers, no escape for all the others who found their way to this place over the years." That's when I understood. Bone Hollow wasn't just the grave of 4 Confederate soldiers. It was a collection point for the lost, the forgotten, The people who disappeared in these mountains without a trace. The entity had been feeding on human sorrow for over a century, growing stronger with each new voice added to its choir of the damned. "Fight it!" Samuel called out. "The cross! Use the cross!" I pulled out my mother's wooden cross, and it immediately began to glow with warm golden light. The entity recoiled, hissing like the water on a hot skillet. "That won't hold us long," it growled. "Faith weakens, hope dies, sorrow is eternal." The 4 soldiers were fading, their forms becoming more translucent as the entity drew power from their presence. But they were still fighting. "The stones," Thomas managed to say. "Break the circle, disturb the pattern." I looked at the ring of rocks around me. They weren't random, they were positioned precisely, part of the geometric design that channeled the hollow's power. If I could break the pattern... The entity lunged toward me, a wave of darkness and screaming faces. I dove to one side and grabbed the nearest stone, a chunk of granite about the size of my head. It was shockingly cold, and touching it sent images flooding through my mind. All the people who had died in this place, all the sorrow that had been harvested here. But I held on and rolled the stone out of position. The effect was immediate. The entity's scream shook the ground, and several of the bone formations visible through the cracks crumbled. The geometric patterns in the vegetation flickered and dimmed. "More," William urged. "Break the circle completely." I scrambled to the next stone, but the entity was recovering. Tendrils of shadow whipped toward me, and where they touched my skin I felt overwhelming despair. Every sad moment of my life magnified 100-fold. The stone was heavier than the first, but I managed to shove it aside just as another tendril wrapped around my leg. The cold was incredible, like being grabbed by winter itself. "You cannot win," the entity hissed. "We are sorrow eternal. We are the grief that never heals." But as I broke the third stone's position, something changed. The soldiers were becoming more solid, not less. The entity's grip on them was weakening as its geometric power structure crumbled. "Keep going," James encouraged. Only one stone left. But the entity had figured out what I was doing, and it threw everything it had at stopping me. The shadow forms of the damned reached through the cracks in the earth, grasping at my legs, and a yow. Mess. The temperature dropped so low that my flashlight beam turned visible, like a laser cutting through Arctic air. I could feel my own despair feeding the entity, my failed attempts at ministry, my isolation in these mountains, my fear that I'd wasted my life. The hollow was using my own sadness against me. But then I heard something else. The soldiers had started singing again, but this time it wasn't a lament. It was a hymn I remembered from childhood, Amazing Grace, sung in 4-part harmony with voices full of hope instead of sorrow. Their music gave me strength. I reached the final stone and, with every ounce of will I had left, rolled it away from its position. The entity's scream shattered the air. The geometric patterns collapsed entirely, and the bone formations below ground crumbled into dust. The shadow creature began to dissolve, its collected voices finally free to move on. "Thank you," the 4 soldiers said in unison as they began to fade. But they were smiling now, really smiling. "Thank you for setting us free." As the entity died and the soldiers departed, the oppressive atmosphere lifted from Bone Hollow. The rhododendron walls returned to normal, and I could feel a warm breeze stirring the dead grass. But I wasn't done yet. The clearing was quiet now, truly quiet, without the unnatural silence that had haunted it before. Even the dead vegetation looked less ominous, more like ordinary plant disease and less like geometric horror. But I had made a promise, and I intended to keep it. Over the next month, I worked with the local historical society and several churches to arrange a proper memorial service for the 4 Confederate soldiers buried in Bone Hollow. We couldn't identify them individually. Their records had been lost long ago, but we could acknowledge their sacrifice and their suffering. On July 28, 1985, about 30 people gathered in this clearing for a simple ceremony. Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church said prayers for the forgotten dead, and we placed a small stone marker identifying the site as a Civil War grave. Mrs. Patterson had found an old photograph of Company B, 23rd Virginia Infantry, which had gone missing during the retreat from Mount Rogers. We figured our 4 soldiers were probably among those faces. The local paper ran a story about the memorial service, calling it a long overdue tribute to the forgotten fallen. I gave an interview focusing on the historical significance of the site, carefully avoiding any mention of supernatural encounters. But the story didn't end with the memorial service. Over the following weeks, I noticed changes throughout the Mount Rogers area. Wildlife began returning to the affected zone. The dead vegetation started showing signs of recovery, green shoots pushing up through the brittle grass, new buds forming on the damaged rhododendrons. Even the strange subsonic frequencies on my recording equipment disappeared. More importantly, other people started coming forward with stories. Tom Hartley told me his dogs had suddenly returned to normal the day after the memorial service. A local hiking guide mentioned that several supposedly haunted spots on the mountain had lost their oppressive atmosphere. And Mrs. Patterson shared records of other unexplained disappearances in the area over the years. People who had vanished without a trace, often near remote clearings or old battlefields. I began to understand that Bone Hollow hadn't been unique. These mountains were full of forgotten places where the dead lay unquiet, feeding entities like the one I'd encountered. The memorial service had done more than honor 4 Civil War soldiers. It had demonstrated that remembrance and proper recognition could break these cycles of supernatural feeding. That realization changed my life. I didn't leave the Forest Service, but I did expand my role. Working with local churches and historical societies, I began identifying other forgotten burial sites through them. Hout, Appalachia. Some were Native American graves disturbed by mining. Others were unmarked cemeteries from the early settlement period. Many were war casualties, not just from the Civil War, but from the French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War, and conflicts that didn't make it into history books. Wherever we found forgotten dead, we held memorial services. Not elaborate affairs. Just simple recognition that these people had lived, suffered, and died, and that their stories mattered. In every case, the supernatural disturbances associated with those sites quieted down afterward. My brother Marcus, the Methodist minister I'd barely spoken to since leaving seminary, reached out after he heard about the Bone Hollow Memorial. We started working together, combining his theological knowledge with my understanding of the forest. It was the beginning of a healing in my own life that I hadn't expected. But I learned to be careful, too. There are places in these mountains where the dead aren't just unquiet. They're dangerous. Places where entities like the one in Bone Hollow have grown too strong to be defeated by faith alone. These sites require different approaches, or sometimes just avoidance until we can figure out better solutions. I keep detailed records now of all supernatural encounters in my territory. Official reports still focus on environmental factors and wildlife management, but I maintain private files documenting the supernatural ecology of the southern Appalachians. Someday, I hope that information might help other rangers dealing with similar situations. As for Bone Hollow itself, it's become one of the most peaceful spots on Mount Rogers. The vegetation has fully recovered, wildlife has returned, and hikers often comment on how serene the clearing feels. Sometimes I go there in the evenings, not because I expect to encounter anything supernatural, but because it reminds me that even the oldest sorrows can find peace if someone cares enough to remember. The stone memorial is still there, weathered but intact. Sometimes people leave flowers or small American flags. A few times I've found notes tucked under the marker, messages from visitors who felt moved to leave some token of remembrance for the 4 soldiers who died there so long ago. The supernatural activity in my sector has decreased dramatically since 1985, but it hasn't disappeared entirely. There are still unexplained sounds, still cold spots in areas where wildlife refuses to go. The difference is that now I know what to listen for, what to watch for, and most importantly, how to help. Because that's what I learned in Bone Hollow. The dead don't usually want to hurt us. They just want to be remembered, to have their stories told, to know that their lives and deaths meant something to someone. Sometimes the most powerful tool a forest ranger can carry isn't a radio or a first aid kit. It's the willingness to bear witness to forgotten sorrow and speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I still hear singing in these mountains. But now it sounds like gratitude instead of grief. My name is Isaiah Crowfeather, and I've been a park ranger at New River Gorge for 20 years. That's 2 decades of pulling stupid kids off cliff faces, finding lost hikers, and dealing with people who think nature is some kind of playground. But what happened in October of '91 changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I'm 46 now, old enough to know better than to believe the stories my Cherokee grandmother used to tell. Stories about giant birds that lived on the highest peaks, birds that controlled the storms and protected sacred places. She called them thunderbirds, and she said they were older than the mountains themselves. I always figured they were just stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far into dangerous places. My dad was Irish, worked the coal mines until black lung killed him. That's what made me want to protect these mountains instead of digging holes in them. Mom was full Cherokee, but she died when I was 12. After that, I pretty much ignored that side of my family. Figured the old ways were just superstition. The Endless Wall Trail is where I spend most of my time. It's a section of massive sandstone cliffs that drop 400 feet straight down to the New River. The rock faces are perfect for climbing, which means they're perfect for getting people killed. I've pulled more bodies off those walls than I care to remember. October in West Virginia is usually beautiful. The leaves turn every color you can imagine, and the air gets that crisp feel that makes you want to spend all day outside. But October of '91 was different. For 3 weeks straight, we'd been getting these weird electromagnetic storms. They weren't like normal thunderstorms. The lightning came without rain, and it made all our radio equipment go crazy. I remember the morning it started because I couldn't get my truck radio to work. Every time I ride to call dispatch, all I got was this high-pitched shrieking sound like metal being scraped against metal. My climbing gear was acting weird too. My carabiners kept sticking together like they were magnetized, and my rope had this strange electric feeling when I touched it. The call came in around 10 in the morning. A climber was stuck on one of the impossible-to-reach ledges about 300 feet up Endless Wall. The voice on the radio was breaking up bad, but I caught enough to know it was serious. The guy had been there all night, and with helicopter rescue out of the question because of the electromagnetic interference, it was up to me to get him down. I'd done hundreds of technical rescues. I knew every crack in that rock face, every handhold, every place where you could anchor a rope. I had all the latest gear, dynamic ropes, spring-loaded camming devices, figure-8 descenders. I followed every safety protocol in the book. But as I packed my gear that morning, I had this feeling in my gut that something was wrong. The climb up to the rescue point should have taken me 40 minutes. I knew the route by heart, but as I got higher, things started feeling off. The rock felt different under my hands, rougher somehow, and there was this smell in the air like ozone before a lightning strike, but stronger, much stronger. When I finally reached the area where the climber was supposed to be, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. There was a ledge there that I'd never seen before, about 20 feet wide and perfectly flat. And on that ledge was the biggest nest I'd ever seen in my life. The thing was huge, maybe 30 feet across, made out of tree branches as thick as my arm. But mixed in with the branches were pieces of metal, car parts, chunks of airplane fuselage, sections of radio towers, all of it twisted and woven together like some kind of giant sculpture. That's when I saw the feathers. They were scattered around the base of the nest, each one bigger than my hand. But they weren't like any bird feathers I'd ever seen. They were metallic, with an oily sheen that caught the light wrong. And when I got close enough to touch one, I could feel electricity running through it, making the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to radio for backup, but all I got was that shrieking sound again. That's when I realized I was completely on my own, 400 feet up a cliff face, looking at something that shouldn't exist. And somewhere in that impossible nest, there was a man who needed help. I'd been climbing these cliffs for 20 years, and I'd never seen anything like that nest. The smart thing would have been to rappel down and call for backup, wait for the electromagnetic storms to pass. But there was a man up there, and that's what I was paid to do: save people who got themselves into trouble. I anchored my rope to a solid piece of rock and started working my way toward the ledge. As I got closer, I could hear something that made my skin crawl. It was like breathing, but huge, deep, slow breaths that seemed to make the whole cliff face vibrate. The metallic feathers were everywhere, some of them as long as my arm. They crackled with static electricity when the wind moved them. I picked one up, and it was warm to the touch, like it had been sitting in sunlight. But we were in shadow, and the day was cool. That's when I heard the voice. "Help, please." It was coming from inside the nest. The climber was alive. I clipped into my safety line and rappelled down to the ledge. The nest was even bigger up close, towering over me like a small building. The branches were woven together so tightly I couldn't see inside, but I could hear movement in there, weak, like someone who hadn't had water in a long time. "I'm here to help," I called out. "I'm a park ranger. Can you tell me your name?" "Tom," came the reply. "Tom Hendricks. I've been here. I don't know how long. I can't move." I found an opening in the side of the nest, just big enough for a person to crawl through. It was like entering a cave made of branches and metal. The smell of ozone was so strong it made my eyes water. And there, in the center of this impossible structure, was Tom Hendricks. He was young, maybe 25, wearing a climbing harness and a helmet with a headlamp that had long since died. But what scared me was the way he was just sitting there, staring straight ahead like he couldn't see me. "Tom, can you hear me? I'm going to get you out of here." He turned toward my voice, and I saw that his eyes were completely white. Not blind white. They were glowing with the same oily sheen as the metallic feathers. "It comes at night," he whispered. "It comes with the lightning." That's when I heard it. A sound like wind, but wrong. Too regular, too powerful. Like something enormous was breathing just outside the nest. I grabbed Tom under the arms and tried to lift him, but he was completely limp. Dead weight. I'd have to carry him out, which meant leaving most of my gear behind and hoping my single rope would hold both our weights. As I dragged him toward the opening, the breathing sound got louder. And then I heard something that made every instinct in my body scream at me to run. Footsteps. Huge footsteps landing on rock with a sound like thunder. I peered through the opening in the nest, and what I saw made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. There was a shadow on the cliff face. But it wasn't the shadow of anything that should exist. It was the shadow of something with wings that stretched across the entire canyon. Wings that moved with slow, deliberate beats that matched the breathing sound. The electromagnetic interference was getting worse. My metal gear was vibrating against the rock, and I could taste copper in my mouth. Every filling in my teeth was achingly sore, like I'd bitten down on a live wire. That's when the nest started to shake. Something enormous had landed on the ledge outside. I could hear it moving around, the sound of claws scraping against stone. And then, impossibly, I heard something that sounded like a voice, but it wasn't coming through the air. It was coming through the metal in the nest, through my climbing gear, through the fillings in my teeth. "Who disturbs the crown of thunder?" The words weren't English, but somehow I understood them. They resonated through every piece of metal around me, making the whole nest ring like a giant bell. Tom's eyes suddenly focused on mine, and for a moment, he looked completely normal. "It's the Guardian," he whispered. "It's been waiting for you." That's when the nest wall exploded inward, and I got my first real look at the Thunderbird. It wasn't a bird. Not really. It was something older, something that might have been the inspiration for every dragon and giant eagle legend that ever existed. Its head was serpentine, covered in those metallic feathers that sparked with electricity. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates, and they glowed with the same white light I'd seen in Tom's eyes. But it was the intelligence in those eyes that really scared me. This wasn't some animal acting on instinct. This was something that could think, something that could plan. and it was looking right at me. The thunderbird filled the opening of the nest, its massive head swaying back and forth like a snake deciding whether to strike. Up close, I could see that its feathers weren't really feathers at all. They were something like metallic scales that moved and shifted with their own electric current. Lightning played across its surface in patterns that almost looked like writing. "You climb in sacred places," the voice said inside my head. "You disturb the old agreements." I didn't know what it was talking about, but I knew I had to get Tom out of there. I grabbed him under the arms and started dragging him toward what looked like another opening in the back of the nest. The thunderbird's head tilted, and those dinner plate eyes followed my movement. When it opened its beak, I could see rows of teeth like metallic daggers, each one crackling with electricity. "The weak one stays," it said. "He failed the test, but you have the old blood." That stopped me cold. "The old blood?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said out loud. "I'm just here to help this man." The creature made a sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could sound like thunder rolling through a canyon. "Cherokee blood. Stormwalker blood. You should know the old ways." My grandmother's stories came flooding back. The thunderbird that lived on the highest peaks, that controlled the storms and tested the worth of those who dared to climb in sacred places. I'd always thought they were just stories. Tom suddenly grabbed my arm with surprising strength. His white glowing eyes were wide with terror. "It took the others," he whispered. "3 other climbers. They're still here somewhere. It keeps the ones who fail." As if summoned by his words, I heard movement from deeper in the nest. Shuffling footsteps and voices that sounded hollow and far away. People talking, but not to each other. Just talking. "Sarah was supposed to meet me at the bottom," one voice said. "I told her I'd be down by sunset." "My kids are waiting for me," said another. "They don't know where I am." "The storm came so fast," said a third. "The lightning was so beautiful." Tom's grip on my arm tightened. "They've been like that for months, some of them for years. It keeps them here, in the deep parts of the nest. They just talk about the lives they used to have." The thunderbird's head moved closer, and I could feel heat radiating from its body. The smell of ozone was so strong now that I could barely breathe. "They came seeking conquest," it said. "They saw the sacred walls as challenges to overcome. They climbed without respect, without understanding. They failed the test of worthiness." "What test?" I managed to ask. "The test of the storm. Can you climb when the mountain itself fights you? Can you respect the power of the sky spirits? Can you put the sacred above the self?" As it spoke, the electromagnetic interference grew stronger. My climbing gear was vibrating so violently I had to hold on to it to keep it from flying apart. But more than that, I could feel the storm building outside. Real thunder now, rolling across the canyon like artillery. "Your test begins now, Stormwalker." The thunderbird pulled its head back, and suddenly the whole nest was filled with lightning. Not normal lightning, this was controlled, deliberate. Bolts of electricity danced between the metallic branches, creating a cage of pure energy around me and Tom. And then the rain started. But it wasn't falling down. It was falling up. Drops of water were being pulled up from the river 400 feet below, creating a reverse waterfall that made the cliff face slick and treacherous. "You have to leave me," Tom said. His voice was getting weaker, and those glowing eyes were starting to dim. "It doesn't want me anymore. I already failed. But you might have a chance." The voices from the deep parts of the nest were getting louder, more urgent. "The storms are beautiful," they chanted in unison. "The lightning shows the way. The thunder calls us home." I realized they weren't just talking randomly. They were being controlled, made to speak the thunderbird's words. And if I failed this test, I'd be joining them. The thunderbird's massive form lifted off the ledge, and suddenly I could see the full scope of what I was dealing with. Its wingspan had to be over 100 feet. Its body was covered in those metallic feathers that sparked and crackled with each beat of its wings. And as it rose into the storm clouds, it began to sing. The song wasn't made of sound, it was made of electricity and electromagnetic pulses that I felt in my bones. It was beautiful and terrible, and it made every piece of metal on the mountain ring in harmony. The cliff face around the nest began to change. Handholds disappeared. New cracks appeared in places I was certain had been solid rock moments before. The whole mountain was being reshaped by the creature's power. "Climb," the voice said. "Climb through the storm. Reach the crown of thunder before the lightning takes you. Prove that Cherokee blood still remembers the old ways." I looked up and saw what it meant. At the very top of the cliff, maybe 200 feet above the nest, there was a platform of rock I'd never seen before. It glowed with the same white light as Tom's eyes, and lightning was striking it over and over again. That was where I had to go. Through a supernatural storm, up a cliff face that was changing beneath my hands, while a creature older than human memory tested my worthiness. And if I failed, I'd spend eternity in the deep parts of the nest, talking about the life I used to have. I left Tom in the nest. I had to. He was already lost, already part of the Thunderbird's collection. But maybe, if I could pass this test, I could save him, save all of them. The climb began the moment I left the nest. The rock face that I'd known for 20 years was completely different. Holds that had been solid were now crumbling under my fingers. Cracks that had been too narrow to use were now wide enough to jam my whole fist into. It was like the mountain was alive, changing to make the climb as difficult as possible. The reverse waterfall made everything slippery. Water was flowing upward along the cliff face, carrying debris from the river below. I had to time my moves between the strongest surges, or risk being knocked off the wall by a chunk of driftwood traveling at 40 miles per hour. But it was the lightning that nearly killed me. It wasn't random. Each bolt was aimed, deliberate, striking just close enough to make me lose my grip without actually hitting me. The Thunderbird was playing with me, testing my reactions, my determination. "This is how they all fail," its voice echoed in my head. "They climb for themselves, for conquest, for the story they will tell." My grandmother's voice came back to me then, words I hadn't thought about in 30 years. "The mountain doesn't care if you're strong, Isaiah. It only cares if you're humble." I stopped climbing for a moment and pressed my forehead against the wet rock. "I'm not climbing for myself," I said out loud. "I'm climbing for Tom, for the others you've trapped, for the sacred places you protect." The lightning stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, there was perfect silence except for the sound of water flowing upward. I could feel the Thunderbird's attention focused on me like a physical weight. "Prove it." The cliff face changed again, but this time it became easier. Holds appeared exactly where I needed them. The upward flowing water formed channels that I could use as guides. The electromagnetic interference faded enough that my gear stopped vibrating. But with each foot of elevation I gained, I could feel the creature's power growing stronger. The crown of thunder was getting closer, and the air itself was becoming electric. My hair was standing on end, and I could taste metal with each breath. When I was 50 feet from the top, I saw them. The other climbers, the ones who had failed the test. They were embedded in the rock face like fossils, but they were still alive. Their eyes glowed with that same white light, and they reached out to me as I climbed past. "Join us," they whispered. "The storm is so beautiful from inside. The lightning shows everything. We understand now." One of them grabbed my ankle, and for a moment I felt what they felt. The peace of giving up. The joy of becoming part of something larger than yourself. The electric ecstasy of being connected to the storm itself. It would be so easy to just let go, to sink into the rock and become another guardian of this sacred place. But then I heard Tom's voice from far below, weak but still human. "Please," he called, "don't leave us like this." That snapped me back. I pulled free from the fossil climber's grip and continued up. But now I understood what the test really was. It wasn't about climbing skill or physical courage. It was about choosing to remain human in the face of something that offered transcendence. The crown of thunder was a circle of standing stones at the very top of the cliff, each one taller than a man and carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Lightning struck each stone in turn, creating a pattern of energy that spiraled up into the storm clouds. And in the center of the circle, waiting for me, was the Thunderbird. It had changed again, becoming less bird-like and more elemental. It was made of storm clouds and lightning now, only occasionally taking solid form. Its voice came from the thunder itself. "You have climbed well, Stormwalker. You remember the old ways. But the final test remains. What do you want from me?" The sacred places must be protected. The Cherokee knew this. They made agreements with the old powers, promises that have been forgotten. Climbers come now seeking only conquest, only the thrill of victory over nature. They must be reminded of their place. I understood then. The Thunderbird wasn't evil. It was doing what it thought was necessary to protect something sacred. But its methods were wrong, trapping people instead of teaching them. "There has to be another way," I said. "People can learn respect without being imprisoned." The creature's form solidified, and those massive eyes focused on me with interest. "You would take responsibility? You would ensure the sacred places remain sacred?" "Yes, I'll teach them. I'll make sure people understand what this place really is. And if they refuse to learn, if they continue to climb without respect?" I thought about that, about the weight of what I was promising. "Then I'll stop them myself, but I won't trap them. I'll find another way." The lightning stopped. The reverse waterfall collapsed back down toward the river. The electromagnetic interference faded, and for the first time in hours, I could hear normal sounds again. Wind in the trees, water flowing in its proper direction. "Very well, Stormwalker. You will be the new keeper of the Crown of Thunder. The old agreements are renewed." The Thunderbird began to fade, becoming transparent, becoming one with the storm clouds above. "But remember, the sacred must remain sacred. If you fail in this duty, if you allow the old ways to be completely forgotten, we will return. And next time, there will be no test." Then it was gone, and I was alone on top of the cliff with nothing but the standing stones and the fading rumble of thunder in the distance. The climb down was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, not because of the rock or the weather. The Thunderbird had restored the cliff face to its normal configuration, but because of what I found waiting in the nest. Tom was awake, his eyes normal brown instead of that electric white. The other voices from the deep parts of the nest had gone silent, and scattered around the ledge were 3 more people, all unconscious but breathing normally. The climbers who had been trapped were free, but they remembered nothing. Nothing except dreams of flying and storms that called their names. Tom looked at me with confusion when I asked him about the Thunderbird. "What bird?" he said. "I fell during that weird lightning storm and hit my head on a ledge. You must have rappelled down and found me. Thanks, man. I owe you one." The rescue helicopter arrived an hour later, as soon as the electromagnetic interference cleared up. They airlifted all 4 climbers to the hospital in Charleston. All of them recovered completely, though the doctors couldn't explain why their blood work showed traces of electrical activity for weeks afterward. I wrote up the official report as a routine rescue operation. Climbers caught in unusual weather conditions, no permanent injuries, equipment malfunction due to electromagnetic anomalies. Nobody questioned it. These mountains are full of weird weather and strange accidents. But things changed for me after that day. I started having dreams about storms. I could predict weather changes days in advance, feeling them in my bones. Metal objects would stick to my hands if I wasn't careful, and sometimes I'd catch myself humming songs that sounded like thunder. More importantly, I started reaching out to the Cherokee community. My grandmother's sister was still alive, living on the reservation in North Carolina. She wasn't surprised when I called her. "Wondered when you'd come back to us," she said. The old ones have been dreaming about you. I learned the real stories then. The Thunderbird wasn't just legend. It was one of many guardian spirits that protected sacred sites throughout Cherokee territory. The agreements she'd mentioned were real, traditional protocols for interacting with dangerous places. Prayers to say, offerings to leave, ways to show respect. I incorporated these traditions into my ranger duties. Not officially. That would have caused too many problems with government regulations. But I started giving talks to climbing groups about respecting sacred sites. I developed unofficial guidelines that most of the experienced climbers in the area learned to follow. The climbing community in West Virginia is small and tight-knit. Word spreads fast when someone knows what they're talking about. Within a year, most serious climbers knew that certain routes were off-limits during storms, that offerings should be left at certain spots, that some places required special respect. There haven't been any more disappearances on Endless Wall, but sometimes during the big electrical storms we still get every October, I climb up to the Crown of Thunder and check the standing stones. They're still there, still active, still connected to something larger than human understanding. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see a shadow with wings too large to belong to any earthly bird, circling high above the sacred places. The other day, a young climber approached me about attempting a new route on the most dangerous part of Endless Wall. When I told him about the spiritual significance of the area and asked him to choose a different climb, he laughed. "Come on, old man," he said. "You don't really believe that Indian stuff, do you?" That night, the storms were particularly intense, and the next morning, that same climber came to find me, looking pale and shaken. "I had the weirdest dream," he told me, "about flying, and this voice that said the mountains were watching. Maybe I'll try a different route after all." I smiled and handed him a small bundle of tobacco, the way my grandmother's sister had taught me. "Leave this at the base of the cliff," I told him. "It's just tradition, but some traditions exist for good reasons." He took it without arguing. The Thunderbird was right about one thing. People can learn respect. They just need the right teacher. And sometimes they need to be reminded that we're not the only intelligence in these mountains. I'm 56 now, still patrolling these cliffs, still keeping the old agreements alive. My Cherokee name is Stormwalker, given to me in a ceremony I never thought I'd be worthy of. My Irish name is still Isaiah Crowfeather, park ranger, technical rescue specialist. But in my dreams, I fly above the sacred places, and the lightning shows me everything I need to protect. The Crown of Thunder is still waiting on the highest peak, and I'm still its keeper, making sure the sacred remains sacred, one climber at a time. Some storms you weather, others you learn to dance with. The Thunderbird taught me the difference. My name is Margaret Holloway, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 17 years. I've pulled lost hikers from ravines, tracked missing hunters through blizzards, and found children who wandered off trails more times than I can count. In all those years, lost children always leave traces. Always. A broken branch where they pushed through bushes, small footprints in mud. A candy wrapper dropped along the path. Something. But the children I found on Grandfather Mountain in September of 1977 left no trace at all. People around here tell stories about kids who live in the mist. Old mountain folk claim these ghost children lure the living away to play forever in the clouds. I never believed any of it. I'm 41 years old, a former school teacher, and I deal in facts. Missing persons cases have explanations. Weather patterns follow rules. Children who disappear can be found if you know where to look. That September was different, though. The weather had gone crazy. Temperature inversions kept thick fog sitting on the mountain peaks like a heavy blanket. You could climb above it and look down at a sea of white mist filling every valley. It was beautiful, but dangerous. Hikers got turned around. Visibility dropped to nothing. The fog muffled sounds in strange ways. I should have known something was wrong when the birds stopped singing. It started on a Tuesday morning. The Hendersons called in around sunrise, voices shaking with panic. Their 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had wandered away from their campsite during the night. They'd been camping at the Rough Ridge Overlook, one of the higher spots along the parkway. When they woke up, her sleeping bag was empty and the tent flap hung open. She heard children playing, Mrs. Henderson told me over the radio, her words broken by static. Said she wanted to join them. We told her no, it was too late, too aggy. But when we woke up, her voice cracked. I grabbed my gear and drove up the mountain road. The fog was thick that morning, so thick I had to use my headlights even though the sun was up. It clung to everything like wet cotton. My radio crackled with interference. The temperature felt wrong too, cold spots mixed with warm pockets that made no sense. At the Henderson campsite, I found exactly what I expected to find. Small sneaker prints leading away from the tent, heading toward the trail that led down into the fog-filled valley. The parents huddled together by their truck, eyes red from crying and no sleep. "Which way did the voices come from?" I asked. Mr. Henderson pointed toward the trail. "Down there, in the mist. Sounded like a bunch of kids playing games. Ring Around the Rosie, maybe. Or London Bridge." I followed Emma's tracks to the edge of the fog line where the white mist rose up from the valley like a wall. Her small footprints were clear in the dirt. Then they just stopped. Not faded or washed away by moisture. Stopped, like she'd been lifted into the air. I called for backup and started my search pattern anyway. Standard procedure. But my radio kept cutting out. My compass needle spun like it couldn't find north. And somewhere below me, in that thick white fog, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Children laughing, playing games, singing songs. Just like the Hendersons said. I've done hundreds of searches, but I'd never seen fog act like this. It stayed perfectly still even when wind blew across the ridge. The edge of it looked solid, like you could reach out and touch it. Worst of all were the sounds coming from inside. "Emma!" I called out. My voice got swallowed up by the mist immediately. No echo, no response. Just that awful quiet that fog brings, broken only by those distant children's voices. I clipped a safety rope to a tree and head down into the white. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment I stepped inside. My flashlight beam only reached about 3 feet. The fog pressed against me like something alive, cold and damp and wrong. The sounds were clearer now. Children singing "Ring Around the Rosie" over and over. But something was off about it. The words were different, older. "Ring a ring of roses, a pocket full of posies. Achoo, achoo, we all fall down." That's not how the song goes. Not the version kids sing today. I followed what looked like a path, though I couldn't be sure. The fog played tricks with distance and direction. Sometimes I heard the children close by, maybe just 10 feet away. Then their voices would sound far off, like they were calling from the bottom of a deep well. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 20 minutes, I found something that stopped me cold. A small pink sneaker sitting on a flat rock. Not Emma's. This one looked old. The style was wrong, like something from decades ago. The leather was cracked and faded. Next to it was a corn husk doll, the kind mountain kids made 100 years ago. Then I heard them again. Not just singing this time. Talking. "Want to play with us?" A little girl's voice asked from somewhere in the white. "We know lots of games." "Emma?" I called back. "Emma Henderson, is that you?" Giggles answered me. High, sweet children's laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Emma's here," another voice said. A boy this time. "She likes our games. She wants to stay and play forever." My hands were shaking as I unclipped my radio. Nothing but static. The fog seemed to press closer, making it hard to breathe. "I need to talk to Emma," I said to the mist. "Her parents are worried." "Parents worry too much," the girl's voice replied. "We don't have parents anymore, we just have each other, and now we have Emma." That's when I saw them. Shapes moving in the fog. Small figures running and playing, there 1 second and gone the next. I caught glimpses of old-fashioned clothes. Long dresses on the girls, knickers and suspenders on the boys. But their faces, I couldn't quite see their faces. "Where are you from?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. "From here," the boy said. "We've always been here. Mama says the fog is our home now." I found more things as I kept walking. A wooden toy horse with most of the paint worn off, a cloth ball stitched by hand, a small leather boot that looked like it was made before World War I, all of them sitting on rocks or hanging from tree branches like decorations, like offerings. The children's voices got louder, more excited. New friend, come play with us, lady. We have the best games. We play hide and seek where you never have to come out. We play follow the leader where the leader goes anywhere she wants. We play house where nobody ever has to go home." That's when I heard Emma crying. "I want my mommy," she sobbed. "I want to go home." "But we're having so much fun," the other children cooed. "Don't you want to keep playing? The fog keeps us safe. Nothing bad can happen in the fog." I had to find her. I had to get her out of there. But the fog was getting thicker, pressing against me like cold hands. My flashlight was almost useless now. The children's voices seemed to come from above and below and all around me. And worst of all, I was starting to lose track of which way was up. I found Emma sitting on a fallen log surrounded by shapes I couldn't quite see clearly. She looked up when I called her name, and relief flooded her face. "Ranger Margaret!" She jumped up and ran toward me. "I can't find my way back." But as she moved, the fog swirled around her, and for just a second, I saw them clearly. The children she'd been sitting with. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, all between the ages of 5 and 10, but they weren't right. Their skin was too pale, almost gray. Their clothes were from different time periods. Some looked like pioneer children, others like they were from the 1920s, and their eyes were empty, not blind, not closed, just empty, like looking into fog itself. "Don't go," one of the girls said to Emma. She was wearing a faded blue dress with a white pinafore. "We were just getting to the fun part." "I have to," Emma whispered, grabbing my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "My parents are scared." The fog children moved closer. They didn't walk exactly, more like they floated just above the ground. Their feet made no sound on the leaves and rocks. "Parents don't understand," the boy in knickers said. His voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "They want to keep you inside, make you do chores, make you go to school. We never have to do any of that." I pulled Emma behind me and started backing up. But which way was out? The fog had turned everything around. I couldn't see more than arm's length in any direction. "How long have you been here?" I asked them, trying to keep my voice steady. "Forever," the girl in the blue dress answered. "Since the sickness came. Mama brought us into the fog to keep us safe, but then Mama went away. So we stayed." "What sickness?" "The one that made everyone cough," the boy said. "Made people fall down and not get up. But the fog kept us safe. The fog always keeps us safe." The flu pandemic of 1918. I remembered reading about it in local history books. Whole families died. Children left orphaned. Some bodies never found because families fled into the mountains. "That was a long time ago," I said gently. "Time doesn't work the same in the fog," another child said. This one looked even older, maybe from the Civil War era based on her dress. Sometimes it's 1918, sometimes it's 1863, sometimes it's yesterday, sometimes it's tomorrow. Emma squeezed my hand tighter. "They showed me games from different times," she whispered. "They know games from before cars were invented." The fog children started moving in a circle around us. Slowly at first, then faster. "New friends should stay," they chanted. "New friends always stay. The fog keeps everyone safe." That's when I realized we weren't alone. There were other shapes in the mist, adult shapes, moving toward us with the same floating gait. "The grown-ups who came to find us," the boy explained, seeing my terror. "They stayed too. Everybody stays in the fog eventually." A man's voice called out from the white. "Don't fight it. It's peaceful here. No worry, no pain, no loss." Another voice, a woman's. "I came looking for my son in 1952. Found him playing with new friends. We're all together now." More voices joined in. Men, women, teenagers. All of them had come into the fog looking for someone. None of them had left. "Your daughter's here too," the woman's voice said, and my blood went ice cold. "Sweet little Katie. She's been waiting for you, Margaret. Waiting for so long." "My daughter is dead," I whispered. "Dead, yes, but not gone. She's here in the fog with us. The fog keeps everyone who belongs here." Then I heard it, a voice I'd dreamed about every night for 3 years. "Mommy. Katie. My Katie, who died of leukemia when she was 7. Who I held as she took her last breath in a hospital bed. Who I buried on a rainy Tuesday in spring. Mommy, I missed you so much." The fog swirled and I saw her. My little girl, wearing the yellow dress I buried her in. She looked exactly the same as the day she died, except her eyes were empty fog gray like the others. "It's not her," I told myself, backing away with Emma still clutching my hand. "It's not real." "I'm real, Mommy. I'm here. I've been waiting for you to come play with us." The fog children had stopped circling. They were all watching me now, waiting to see what I would do. Emma tugged on my jacket. "We have to go, please. I want to see my real Mommy and Daddy." But Katie was walking toward us now, her arms reaching out for a hug I'd dreamed about for 3 years. "Don't you miss me, Mommy? Don't you want us to be together again?" Every fiber of my being wanted to run to her, to hold Katie again, to tell her how sorry I was that I couldn't save her from the cancer, to have my little girl back, even if it meant staying in this cursed fog forever. But Emma's small hand in mine kept me grounded. She was alive. She had parents waiting for her. And deep down, I knew this wasn't really Katie. "You're not my daughter," I said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. The Katie thing smiled sadly. "I am, and I'm not. I'm what's left of her love for you. What's left of your love for her." The fog gathered it all up and made me real. The fog doesn't make anything real. It just traps things that should be free to go. All the fog children moved closer now. The adults too. I could hear them whispering. Dozens of voices, all saying the same thing. "Stay. Stay with us. Stay where it's safe." "This isn't safe," I told them. "This is hiding. This is being afraid to let go." "Letting go hurts," the boy in knickers said. "Yes," I agreed. "It does. But holding on when you should let go hurts worse." I looked at the Katie thing again. God, she looked so real, so much like my baby girl. "You're not afraid anymore, are you?" I asked her. She shook her fog-gray head. "No, Mommy, I'm not afraid. But I'm lonely. We're all lonely." Lonely doesn't mean you get to steal other people's children. We just want friends. Then you need to make friends the right way, not by trapping them. The fog was starting to swirl faster around us. I could feel anger in it now. These spirits had been alone for so long, they'd forgotten how to be anything but selfish with the living. "Emma needs to go home," I said firmly. "All the children who don't belong here need to go home." "No!" The fog children's voices rose together in a horrible wail. "No one leaves! Everyone stays!" The fog pressed against us like a living thing, trying to push us down, trying to make us sit and stay and play forever. Emma cried out, as cold hands grabbed at her clothes. That's when I understood. They weren't evil, these lost souls. They were just scared and lonely and desperate, like any children who'd been abandoned too long. "I know you're scared," I called out over their wailing. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love. But keeping Emma won't bring back what you lost. It'll just create more loss." "We don't want to be alone," the girl in the blue dress sobbed. "You don't have to be alone," I said gently. "But you can't force people to stay with you. Love doesn't work that way." I felt the fog loosening its grip slightly. Emma's parents love her the way you were loved, the way Katie was loved. If you take her away from them, you'll be creating the same pain you felt when you lost your families. The Fog children looked at each other. For the first time, doubt crept into their empty eyes. "But if we let her go, we'll be alone again," the boy whispered. "No," I said, and I looked directly at the Katie thing. "You'll be free to find the people who are waiting for you, the people who went ahead." Katie smiled then, and for just a moment, her eyes weren't fog gray anymore. They were brown, like they used to be, like mine. "Will you be okay, Mommy, if I go?" I was crying now, tears I'd held back for 3 years, finally breaking free. "I'll be okay, baby girl. I'll miss you forever, but I'll be okay." She nodded and walked over to the other Fog children. One by one, they began to fade, becoming lighter and more transparent. "Thank you," the girl in blue whispered as she disappeared. "Thank you for teaching us how to let go." The fog started to lift. Emma and I climbed out of the valley as the mist dissolved around us like a bad dream. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. My radio crackled back to life with frantic calls from the other search teams. "Base, this is Margaret," I said. "Found her. We're both okay." The Hendersons cried when they saw Emma running toward their truck. They hugged her and hugged me and asked 100 questions about where she'd been and how we'd found our way out. I told them she'd gotten turned around in the fog and taken shelter under a rock overhang until the mist cleared. It was a lie, but it was a lie that let them sleep at night. The official report listed it as a standard missing child case resolved through normal search procedures. Weather conditions caused temporary communication difficulties and visibility issues. Nobody mentioned the voices in the fog or the children who shouldn't exist. But I knew better. And sometimes, on foggy nights, other rangers would radio in with strange reports. Children's laughter coming from empty valleys. Voices calling for help that led nowhere. Footprints that started and stopped with no explanation. I started carrying extra flashlights and blankets in my truck after that. Not for the living lost souls I might find, but for the dead ones who might finally be ready to move on. Because I learned something important in that fog. Sometimes the dead need help finding their way to whatever comes next, just like the living do. 3 months later, I visited Katie's grave for the first time since the funeral. I brought yellow flowers, her favorite, and told her about Emma and the Fog children and how proud I was that she'd learned to let go. The headstone was warm under my hand despite the cold November air. "I love you, baby girl," I whispered, "but I'm glad you're not trapped anymore." A breeze stirred the leaves around the grave, and just for a second I could have sworn I heard her giggle. Happy laughter, free and clear, and heading towards something bright. I still work search and rescue. I still find lost children. But now I know that sometimes the children who are lost aren't the ones we're looking for. Sometimes they're the ones calling for help from places we can't see, begging us to remember them and love them and then help them find their way home. The fog still rolls through the Blue Ridge Mountains. It probably always will. But these days, when I hear children playing in the mist, I hear something different in their voices. I hear peace. Margaret Holloway retired from the National Park Service in 1995. She spent her final years volunteering with grief counseling groups and organizing memorial services for children who died in historical epidemics throughout Appalachian communities. She passed away peacefully in 2018 and is buried next to her daughter Katie in the Grandfather Mountain Cemetery, where visitors sometimes report hearing gentle laughter on foggy mornings. My name is Solomon Blackwood, and I've been fighting fires in these mountains for 24 years. I thought I knew every way flame could behave. But what burned on Roan Mountain that spring made me question everything I believed about fire, about these mountains, and about my own Cherokee blood. It was April 1972, the worst drought anyone could remember. The mountains were dry as old bones. Every morning I climbed the metal stairs to my fire tower, 8 miles from the nearest road. Up there, surrounded by nothing but wind and sky, I watched for the first signs of smoke. The tower swayed in the wind, creaking like an old ship. My radio crackled with static. Sometimes I wouldn't talk to another human being for days. Just me, the mountains, and the constant fear that somewhere out there, a spark was waiting to become a monster. I was 52 then, old enough to know better than to believe in ghost stories. My grandmother used to tell me about fire spirits, about how the Cherokee once used controlled burns to keep the forest healthy. But I was a modern man with modern equipment. Thermometers, wind gauges, radio equipment. Science, not superstition. The flame azaleas were starting to bloom that April, turning the mountainsides orange and red. Beautiful, but dangerous too. Those flowers meant dry conditions, fire weather. My father was Cherokee, my mother Irish. Dad never talked much about the old ways. When he was a boy, developers had burned out his family's farm. Fire's just fire, he used to say. Nothing magic about it. I believed him. From my tower, I could see the ancient balds, open grasslands where Cherokee ceremonies used to happen. Developers wanted to build condos up there. They'd already started clearing some of the sacred sites, pushing over old burial grounds with their bulldozers. The Cherokee Nation was fighting them in court, but legal battles v slow. Meanwhile, the machines kept working. That morning in April, I noticed something odd. The wind was blowing east to west, but I could see heat shimmer rising in 3 perfect circles on the far ridge. Heat shimmer usually moves with the wind. These circles stayed perfectly still. I checked my instruments. Everything looked normal. Temperature, humidity, wind speed, all within expected ranges. But those circles bothered me. In all my years watching these mountains, I'd never seen heat patterns like that. I radioed the dispatcher. "This is Tower 7. I'm seeing unusual heat signatures on the North Ridge. No visible smoke, but something's generating thermal activity." "Copy that, Solomon. Want me to send a patrol?" "Not yet. I'll keep watching." But as the day wore on, those circles grew bigger. And stranger still, they seemed to be following the old Cherokee trails, the ones that led to the ceremonial grounds. By evening, I was starting to get worried. The drought had everyone on edge. One spark could burn half the mountain. I decided to hike down and investigate in the morning. That night, lying in my small cabin below the tower, I dreamed about my grandmother. She was young again, standing in a circle of fire that didn't burn. "The spirits are waking up, Solomon," she said. "They're angry about what's happening to their sacred places." I woke up sweating. Just a dream, I told myself. But when I climbed the tower at sunrise, those 3 circles had become 6, and now I could see tiny wisps of smoke rising from each one. Something was happening on my mountain, something that didn't fit in any fire safety manual I'd ever read. The first patrol found the fires just after noon. I guided the crew by radio, watching through binoculars as their truck bounced up the old logging road. "Tower 7, this is Unit 12. We've reached the first site. This is weird." "Solomon, describe what you see." "It's a perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across. Everything inside the circle is burned clean, but the grass right outside the line is completely green. Never seen anything like it." I felt a chill despite the warm spring air. "Any idea what started it?" "No lightning strikes reported. No evidence of human activity. And get this, it only burned certain plants. The flame azaleas are gone, but the oak saplings right in the middle are untouched." That didn't make sense. Fire doesn't pick and choose what to burn based on species. It burns whatever fuel is available. "Check the other sites," I told them. Each circle was identical, perfect rounds of burned earth with green grass right up to the edge. The crew chief, Jim Martinez, had been fighting fires almost as long as me. When he got back to the station, his voice was shaky. "Solomon, I've seen grass fires jump roads and leave houses standing. I've seen crown fires skip over wet areas, but I've never seen fire burn in perfect circles and leave half the fuel untouched." That evening, I hiked down to see for myself. The first circle was exactly as Jim described. The burned area was cool to the touch, even though the fire had apparently been burning all day. I knelt down and put my hand on the ash. It felt warm, but not hot. Comfortable, almost. In the center of each circle, the earth was marked with symbols, not burned into the ground, carved like someone had used a sharp tool. The symbols looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. I was taking pictures when I heard footsteps. Tommy Crow, an old Cherokee firefighter, emerged from the tree line. He was supposed to be retired, but he still showed up whenever there was trouble on the mountain. "You know what those symbols mean?" I asked him. Tommy studied the marks for a long time. His face was serious, worried. "These are old symbols, Solomon. Cleansing marks. The kind our ancestors used in fire ceremonies." "Come on, Tommy. Someone carved these. Maybe kids playing pranks. Kids don't know these symbols. Haven't been us it in over 100 years." He looked around the circle. "This is a cleansing fire. The spirits are burning away something that doesn't belong." I wanted to argue, but something in his voice stopped me. Tommy had grown up hearing the old stories from people who remembered them firsthand. What would they be cleansing? Depends. Could be sickness in the land. Could be anger at how the sacred places are being treated. He pointed toward the development site. Could be both. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those perfect circles. At 3 a.m., I climbed back up the tower to check the instruments. The temperature readings made no sense. According to my gauges, the air temperature around those 6 circles was 20 degrees cooler than the surrounding area, but I'd felt warmth when I touched the ash. Then I saw the flames. 6 columns of fire, each about 10 feet tall, rose from the circles like giant candles. They burned steady and bright, but they gave off no smoke, no heat signature on my instruments. According to my equipment, those fires didn't exist. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was hallucinating from stress and lack of sleep. But when I looked again, the flames were still there. Beautiful, impossible flames that burned without fuel. I reached for my radio to call it in, then stopped. What would I say? That I was seeing ghost fires? They'd pull me off the mountain and send me for a psychological evaluation. Instead, I watched. The flames burned for exactly 1 hour, then vanished. When sunrise came, I hiked back down to the circles. No new ash, no signs the fires had burned at all. But the carved symbols were deeper, clearer, and there were 12 circles now instead of 6. By the end of the week, we had 37 circles scattered across the mountain. The development company was getting nervous. Their workers reported equipment fail, unexplained accidents, and strange sounds at night. "It's like the mountain doesn't want us here," one of the bulldozer operators told his supervisor. The supervisor laughed it off. "Mountains don't have opinions. Keep working." But I was starting to think maybe they did. The first time I saw him, I thought it was just another firefighter. A tall man in old-fashioned gear, standing at the edge of one of the burning circles. It was 3 in the morning, and I was doing another tower watch. I called down to him. "Hey, you're not supposed to be up here alone." He turned and looked up at me. Even from 100 feet away, I could see his eyes. They glowed like coals in the darkness. When he smiled, flames flickered between his teeth. I blinked, and he was gone. The next morning, I told myself it was exhaustion. Too many long nights, too much stress. But the circles kept multiplying, and strange things kept happening. Workers at the development site reported tools that became too hot to hold, even in the cool morning air. One bulldozer caught fire for no reason. It just burst into flames while parked overnight. The fire department came, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left but ash arranged in a perfect circle. "Electrical fire," the fire chief said. But I saw the worry in his eyes. Tommy Crow started spending more time on the mountain. He brought other Cherokee elders with him, old men and women who spoke in hushed voices and left small offerings at the edge of the circles. "They're getting stronger," Tommy told me one evening as we watched 3 columns of fire dance in the distance. "The spirits. They've been sleeping for a long time, but all the digging and clearing woke them up." "Spirits don't exist, Tommy." "Then what's making those fires burn without fuel? What's carving those symbols? What's scaring those bulldozer drivers so bad they won't work after dark?" I didn't have answers. My instruments recorded everything as normal. But my eyes saw impossible things. Fires that burned uphill against the wind. Flames that gave warmth instead of heat. Shadows that moved when no one was there to cast them. The worst part was how the fires affected me. Standing near the circles, I felt different, calmer, like I was coming home after a long trip. The Cherokee part of me that I'd always ignored started waking up, remembering things my grandmother had told me decades ago. Stories about fire spirits who protected sacred places, legends about ancestors who could speak through flames, tales of how the Cherokee had lived with the mountain spirits for thousands of years before the forced removal, before the Trail of Tears scattered the people and left the sacred places empty. One night, I made a decision that probably should have gotten me fired. Instead of staying in the tower, I climbed down and walked into one of the burning circles. The flames surrounded me, rising up like orange curtains. But they didn't burn. Instead, they felt like warm water, like being wrapped in my grandmother's quilt on a cold night. And I heard voices. Not words exactly, but feelings. Emotions that came from the flames themselves. Anger at the destruction of sacred places. Sorrow for the Cherokee people driven from their homeland. And underneath it all, a deep, patient love for the mountain and everything that lived on it. I understood then what Tommy had been trying to tell me. These weren't just random fires. They were the mountain's immune system fighting off an infection. The spirits weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were trying to heal damage that had been done to something sacred. But the development company didn't see it that way. They brought in more equipment, bigger machines. They started working around the clock, racing to clear the land before whatever was causing the electrical problems could stop them. That's when the spirits decided to stop being gentle. The next morning, every piece of heavy equipment on the mountain was found arranged in a perfect circle, melted down to slag. No explosion, no fire hot enough to melt steel, just smooth, clean destruction that left the surrounding trees, completely untouched. The development company called in investigators. The insurance adjusters took pictures and measurements. The police looked for signs of sabotage or arson. They found nothing that made sense in the normal world. But I knew what had happened. I'd seen the fire spirits in their true form now. Not the gentle flames that had comforted me, but the fierce protectors that could burn hot enough to melt metal while leaving a blade of grass unharmed. The mountain had declared war, and the spirits were just getting started. The development company wasn't giving up. They brought in armed security guards and started working only during daylight hours. They hired engineers to study the anomalous thermal events and meteorologists to explain the unusual weather patterns. But they couldn't explain the fire spirit I met on the old Cherokee Trail. It was noon on a cloudless day when I saw him again. This time he didn't disappear when I looked directly at him. He was tall and lean, wearing traditional Cherokee clothing that seemed to be made of flame and shadow. His face was kind but sad, like someone carrying the weight of old sorrows. "You know who I am," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. "You're one of the fire spirits, the ones protecting this place. I am one of many. We have slept since our people were taken from this mountain, but the desecration of our sacred places has awakened us." I felt no fear standing there talking to a being made of fire and memory. Maybe because I finally understood that he was protecting something I should have been protecting all along. "What do you want?" "To restore balance, to honor the sacred places, to ensure that the ceremonies can continue as they were meant to. The development company won't stop. They've invested too much money." The spirit's eyes flared brighter. "Then they will learn that some things are more valuable than money." That afternoon, the mountain caught fire. Not the slow, spreading wildfire I'd spent my career fighting. This was different. Walls of flame erupted simultaneously at dozens of points, creating a ring of fire around the development site. But instead of burning outward like normal fire, these flames burned inward, closing the circle. I watched from my tower as construction workers ran for their vehicles, only to find the access road blocked by a curtain of fire that rose 50 feet into the air. They were trapped. But strangely, none of them seemed to be in immediate danger. The flames weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were just waiting. I radioed the dispatcher. "This is Tower 7. We have a major fire event on the North Ridge, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Do you need evacuation?" I looked at the flames surrounding my tower. They were close enough to touch, but I felt no heat. "Negative. I think I need to stay here." That's when Tommy Crow arrived with a group of Cherokee elders. They'd somehow walked through the ring of fire carrying drums, ceremonial pipes, and bundles of sage. The flames parted for them like a curtain. "It's time, Solomon," Tommy called up to me. "Time to choose which side you're on." I climbed down from the tower and joined them in the center of the fire circle. The elders began a ceremony I'd heard about but never seen, a traditional fire blessing, sung in Cherokee words I barely remembered from childhood. As they sang, I understood what the spirits wanted. Not destruction, but cooperation. Not war, but partnership. They wanted the Cherokee people to return to the sacred places and restore the ancient relationship between the people and the land. The development company executives, trapped in their trailer by walls of flame, watched through the windows as the ceremony continued. I saw fear in their faces, but also something else. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that they were witnessing something far older and more powerful than their construction equipment. When the ceremony ended, the fire spirit appeared again. This time he spoke to everyone present, his voice somehow audible despite the roar of the flames. "This land is sacred to my people. It has been desecrated by those who do not understand its value. The fires will end when the sacred places are protected, and the Cherokee people are welcome to return." One of the executives, a woman in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "What exactly are you asking for?" "Partnership," the spirit said. "Work with the Cherokee Nation to create something that honors both progress and tradition. Build around the sacred places, not through them. Include Cherokee voices in your planning. Show respect for what came before." The negotiations took 3 days, with the Cherokee Nation's lawyers, the development company's board, and federal mediators all working together while surrounded by patient, watchful flames. In the end, they reached an agreement. The development would continue, but on a smaller scale. The sacred sites would become a protected cultural preserve. The Cherokee Nation would have permanent representation on the planning committee. And I would stay on as the mountain's fire warden, learning to work with both modern equipment and ancient wisdom. As the last papers were signed, the flames slowly died away. The fire spirit appeared one final time, nodding at me before fading into the smoke. "Balance," Tommy said. That's all they ever wanted, balance between the old ways and the new. That was 50 years ago. I'm an old man now, but I still live on Roan Mountain. The development was completed, but it looks nothing like what was originally planned. Instead of condos covering the mountainside, there's a small eco-resort that works with the Cherokee Nation to offer cultural programs and traditional crafts workshops. The sacred fire circles are still there, maintained by sheriffs, Okie volunteers who hold monthly ceremonies. Tourists come to learn about traditional fire management and Cherokee history. Some even report seeing unusual lights in the forest at night. I never talk publicly about the fire spirits. Official reports describe the 1972 events as a series of unusual wildfires caused by extreme drought conditions. The melted equipment was explained as a rare thermal anomaly. But sometimes on nights when the moon is dark and the wind is still, I climb up to my old fire tower. The flames still dance in the distance, keeping their eternal watch over the sacred places. The spirits aren't gone. They're just content now that the mountain is being treated with proper respect. My son works as a park ranger, and his daughter is learning Cherokee traditional crafts from the elders. The old ways and the new ways are finding balance, just like the spirits wanted. People ask me if I really believe in fire spirits. I tell them I believe in protecting what's sacred, whether that's wilderness, culture, or the ancient agreements between people and the land they live on. But on quiet nights, when I hear drums echoing from the ceremonial grounds and see the gentle flames dancing between the trees, I know the spirits are still there, still watching, still protecting. And I'm grateful they trusted me to help them find a better way than war. The mountain taught me that some fires aren't meant to be fought. Some fires are meant to light the way home. My name is Duncan McReady, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. I've seen bears tear through campsites, watched lightning split ancient trees in half, and pulled lost hikers from ravines so deep the sun never touches bottom. But what I'm about to tell you happened in November of 1976, during the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. And it changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I was stationed at the Weather Observation Post on Dolly Sods, way up in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Most folks don't know about Dolly Sods. It's this weird, flat plateau sitting 4,000 feet up in the sky. The wind never stops blowing up there, and the trees grow all twisted and short, like old men bent over from carrying too much weight. My job was simple enough. Check the weather instruments every 6 hours, record wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure, send the reports down to the valley by radio. During bad storms, I'd stay up there alone for days, sometimes weeks. The concrete building was built to handle anything. Thick walls, reinforced roof, backup generators. It was like a bunker stuck on top of the world. The storm hit on November 15th, 3 days ahead of what the forecasters predicted. I should have been worried when the radio started crackling with static that morning, but I'd been through dozens of storms before. My wife Sarah always said I was too stubborn for my own good. Maybe she was right. By noon, the wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. The temperature dropped from 35 degrees to 15 in just 2 hours. Snow came down so thick I couldn't see the instrument tower 20 feet from my window. This wasn't normal weather, even for November. Something felt wrong about it, like the mountain itself was angry. I tried calling the ranger station in the valley, but all I got was static. The backup radio did the same thing. By evening, I realized I was completely cut off. No phone lines reached the weather station. Everything went through radio. The supply helicopter wasn't due for another 4 days, and in this storm, it couldn't fly anyway. That first night, I wasn't scared. Annoyed maybe, but not scared. I had enough food for 2 weeks, plenty of fuel for the generator, and enough books to keep me busy. I'd been alone on the mountain plenty of times before, but as I settled in to sleep, listening to the wind slam against the walls like giant fists, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the station. I told myself it was just the storm. Mountains do strange things to sound. Wind can howl through rocks and make you think you're hearing voices. But when I looked out the window that night, I could swear I saw something moving in the snow, something tall and dark, walking upright through the blizzard like the wind didn't even touch it. I woke up the next morning to silence. After 12 hours of howling wind, the quiet felt almost solid, like something I could touch. I pulled on my boots and heavy coat and went outside to check the instruments. That's when I saw the tracks. They were in the fresh snow, leading right up to the weather station and circling around it 3 times before heading back into the tree line. But these weren't bear tracks, or deer tracks, or anything I'd ever seen before. They looked almost human. You could see where toes had pressed into the snow, but they were huge, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, and the stride between each track was impossible. I measured it myself. 7 feet from heel to heel. I followed the tracks for about 50 yards before they disappeared into a jumble of boulders. No man could step that far, not even someone 7 feet tall. And what kind of person walks barefoot through a blizzard? Zard? I went back inside and checked my reference books. Could have been a bear walking on its hind legs, I told myself. Bears can do that for short distances. But bears don't walk ins, perfectly straight lines, and they don't circle buildings like they're studying them. The radio was still dead. I spent the morning trying different frequencies, adjusting the antenna, checking all the connections. Nothing. It was like something had put a blanket of silence over the whole mountain. Around noon, I heard the first howl. It came from somewhere up the ridge, maybe half a mile away, long and low like a wolf, but deeper, louder. It echoed off the rocks for what seemed like forever. Then another howl answered it from the opposite direction. Then another from behind the station. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line. The snow had stopped, but the clouds hung low and gray, making everything look flat and colorless. At first, I didn't see anything. Then something moved near a cluster of pine trees about 200 yards away. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and covered in dark hair or fur. It moved like a man, but hunched forward, with long arms that swung as it walked. For just a moment, it turned toward the station, and I swear I saw a face looking back at me. Not an animal face. Something that might have been human once, but wasn't anymore. I blinked, and it was gone. That afternoon, I found my anemometer, the instrument that measures wind speed, lying in pieces 50 yards from the tower where it belonged. The metal pole it had been attached to was bent completely in half. It would have taken incredible strength to do that, and the pole was mounted 15 feet off the ground. As evening came on, I started hearing them moving around the station, footsteps in the snow, circling the building over and over. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement through the windows, a shadow passing by, always just out of clear sight. The howls came more frequently now, like they were calling to each other. I tried the radio again that night, scanning through it, every frequency. Finally, around midnight, I picked up a weak signal from the valley station. Anyone copy? Missing hunting party. Last seen heading toward Dollysods. 4 men. Been 3 days. The signal faded before I could respond. But I'd heard enough. 4 men were missing somewhere on my mountain, and something told me I knew what had found them. The next morning, I decided to investigate. Whatever was out there, I needed to know what I was dealing with. I loaded my rifle, put on my heaviest winter gear, and headed toward where I'd seen the creature the day before. The tracks were everywhere now, dozens of them, crisscrossing through the snow like highways. They led in all directions, but most seemed to head toward a section of the ridge I'd never explored, a maze of house-sized boulders that looked like they'd been dropped by giants. I followed the main trail for about a quarter mile before I found the camp. It was tucked into a natural shelter between 2 huge rocks. At first, I thought it was just where the missing hunters had stopped to rest. Their orange dome tent was still standing, and I could see sleeping bags and gear scattered around. But as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. The tent had been ripped open from the outside. Long tears in the fabric, like giant claws, had slashed through it. Sleeping bags were shredded and scattered. A cooler had been torn apart and the food scattered, but not eaten, just destroyed. And there was blood in the snow. Not pools of it, but drops and smears like someone had been dragged away. I found one of the men's boots about 20 yards from the camp. It was still laced up tight, but empty. Whatever had pulled the man out of it had done so with enough force to leave the boot behind. The trail of blood led deeper into the boulder field. I followed it, my rifle ready, until I came to what I can only describe as a lair. Someone, or something, had arranged the huge rocks into a shelter, not randomly, but with clear purpose. Smaller stones had been fitted between the larger ones to block wind and snow. Inside, the ground was covered with pine boughs and animal skins, and scattered throughout were pieces of metal and cloth that looked like they'd been there for decades. I picked up one of the metal pieces. It was part of a canteen, dented and corroded, with German writing stamped on the side. I found more pieces, buttons from military uniforms, a rusted knife, even what looked like part of a rifle stock. All of it old, probably from the 1940s. I knew the history. During World War II, there had been prisoner of war camps scattered throughout these mountains. German POWs worked in logging camps and road crews. Some had tried to escape into the wilderness. Most were recaptured, but a few just disappeared into the deep woods, never to be seen again. What if some of them had survived? What if they'd been living up here all these years, isolated from civilization, slowly becoming something else? A howl echoed through the rocks, much closer than before, then another, and another. They were all around me. I'd walked right into their territory, and they knew I was here. I started back toward the weather station, trying to move quietly, but the snow crunched under my boots like breaking glass. Behind me, I could hear them following, not trying to hide anymore. Branches cracking, rocks clattering, the soft sound of bare feet in snow. I made it back to the station just as the sun was setting. The creatures didn't follow me into the clearing. They stayed back in the trees, watching. But I could see their eyes reflecting the light from my windows. Red eyes, too large and too intelligent to belong to any animal I knew. That night, they tested the building's defenses. It started with scratching at the walls, long, deliberate scrapes like fingernails on concrete. Then the sound of something heavy being dragged around the perimeter. My backup generator was outside in a small shed 20 feet from the main building. Around midnight, the lights went out. Through the window, I watched one of them standing next to the generator shed. It was massive, had to be over 8 feet tall and built like a linebacker. Its hair was long and matted, and it moved with a strange, careful intelligence. It had found the fuel line and cut it with something sharp. I had flashlights and battery-powered lanterns, but I knew the cold would be a problem without the heater. The temperature outside was dropping toward zero. They surrounded the building after that, maybe 6 or 7 of them. I could see their shapes moving in the darkness, always staying just out of clear sight. They were studying the building, looking for weaknesses, testing the door, scratching at the windows. Around 3 in the morning, one of them started making sounds that might have been words. Guttural, broken syllables that almost formed sentences. It sounded like German, but German spoken by someone who'd forgotten how to use their voice properly. Kalt, it said, over and over. So kalt, cold, so cold. By dawn, I understood what I was dealing with. These weren't animals. They weren't monsters from some fairy tale. They were men, or had been men once. German soldiers who'd escaped into the mountains 30 years ago and somehow survived. The isolation, the cold, the constant struggle for survival had changed them into something else. Something that remembered being human, but couldn't go back. The thought should have made me feel sorry for them. Instead, it terrified me even more. As the sun came up, they retreated into the forest. But I knew they'd be back. And I knew they were getting bolder. The night before, they'd been testing my defenses. Tonight, they might decide to come inside. I spent the day preparing. I had 3 emergency flares in my survival kit, the kind that burn white hot and can be seen for miles. Fire seemed to be the only thing that kept them at a distance. They'd stayed away from the lighted windows, and they'd retreated when dawn came. I also had 1 stick of emergency dynamite, meant for clearing rock slides from the access road. If things got bad enough, I could bring down part of the ridge and maybe block their approach to the station. But first, I had to try the radio one more time. I managed to raise the valley station just before sunset. The signal was weak and full of static, but I got through. "This is Weather Station Alpha," I transmitted. "Emergency situation. Need immediate evacuation." "Duncan?" The voice belonged to Jim Morrison, the chief ranger. "We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. What's your situation?" "I'm not alone up here, Jim. There are people on the mountain, dangerous people. They killed those missing hunters." "Say again. Did you say people?" "Listen carefully. There are survivors from the old POW camps living up here. They've gone feral. They're hunting in packs. I need extraction immediately." Long silence. Then, "Duncan, are you feeling all right? Maybe the isolation is getting to you. We can have a helicopter up there first thing tomorrow if the weather clears." "You don't understand," I said. "They're not human anymore. They're—" The radio went dead. Something had cut the antenna cable outside. Through the window, I saw the largest of them standing next to the radio tower. It looked directly at me and made a sound that might have been laughter. That's when I realized they'd been listening to my radio transmissions. They understood enough to know I was calling for help, and they weren't going to let that happen. As darkness fell, they came for me. This time they didn't test or probe. They came straight to the door and started tearing at it with tools, crude hammers made from rocks, metal bars salvaged from old equipment. The steel door was strong, but the frame around it was starting to buckle. I lit the first flare and held it up to the window. The brills and white light made them scramble backward, howling. But they didn't go far. They just waited at the edge of the light, and when the flare started to dim, They moved forward again. The door gave way just as the flare died. The biggest one squeezed through first, followed by two others. Up close, they were even more terrible than I'd imagined. Their hair was long and matted with dirt and blood. Their skin was pale and scarred from years of cold and violence. They wore scraps of clothing, bits of military uniform, animal skins, pieces of fabric taken from their victims. But it was their faces that haunted me most. You could still see the men they'd once been. Human features buried under decades of savagery, but recognizable. One of them had blue eyes and a scar across his forehead. Another had gold teeth that caught the light when he snarled. The leader spoke to me in broken English, mixed with German words. "You call for help," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, but the words were clear. "No help comes. We make sure." "We stay here now," said another. "Long time alone. Now we have company." I lit the second flare. Again they backed away, but not as far this time. They were learning that the light couldn't really hurt them. 30 years, the leader continued. 30 years we live in cold. Hunt when hungry. Take what we need. You understand? We take what we need. They'd been watching the station for years, I realized, learning my routines, my schedules. They knew when I'd be alone and cut off from help. This wasn't random. It was planned. The second flare was dimming. I had one left, plus the dynamite. But using the dynamite inside the building would probably kill me too. That's when I remembered the emergency protocol manual. Page 47 detailed the procedure for controlled avalanches to clear blocked roads. There was a natural overhang about 100 yards up the ridge. If I could get there and place the dynamite right, I might be able to bring down enough snow and rock to block their access to the station. But that meant going outside. It meant running through their territory in the dark, with only one flare to light the way. The choice was made for me when the leader smiled, showing broken teeth, and said, "We keep you alive long time. More fun that way." I lit the last flare, threw it into the corner where the three creatures were standing, and ran for the back door. The flare gave me maybe 30 seconds head start. I ran up the ridge toward the overhang, stumbling through knee-deep snow, following a path I'd walked dozens of times in daylight but never in complete darkness. Behind me, I could hear them coming. All of them this time, maybe 8 or 9 creatures crashing through the forest like a pack of wolves. But they were calling to each other in their broken German, coordinating their hunt. They'd done this before. I reached the overhang just as the flare light faded completely. My hands were shaking from cold and fear as I wedged the dynamite stick into a crack in the rock face and set the timer for 60 seconds. In the darkness, I could see their eyes getting closer, pairs of red dots weaving between the trees. The explosion lit up the entire mountainside for a split second. A sound like thunder rolled across the plateau, followed by the rumble of tons of snow and rock sliding down the slope. The avalanche swept past me on both sides, carrying trees and boulders toward the weather station. When the noise stopped, everything was silent. No howling. No footsteps in the snow. No red eyes watching from the darkness. I made my way back to what was left of the station. The avalanche had missed the building by about 20 feet, but it had completely blocked the access road and buried the clearing where the creatures had been hunting. If any of them survived, they were trapped on the other side of a wall of snow and rock. The rescue helicopter found me 3 days later, when the they're finally cleared. Severe frostbite on my hands and feet. Hypothermia. What the doctors called exposure psychosis. Hallucinations brought on by isolation and cold. That's the official story anyway. I never went back to high-altitude assignments. Took a transfer to a lower elevation, closer to town. My wife Sarah left me 6 months later. Said I wasn't the same person anymore. She was right. The weather station was never rebuilt. The Forest Service said it was too expensive to clear the avalanche debris. They installed automated equipment at a safer location in the valley. No one needs to stay alone on the mountain anymore. But sometimes, on winter nights when the wind is blowing hard, hikers still report strange sounds from the high country. howls that might be wind through the rocks, footprints in the snow that might belong to bears walking upright. The old-timers around here know better than to go above the tree line during storm season. And they tell their children and grandchildren the same thing my grandfather told me when I first came to these mountains. Some things are better left alone up there. Some things have been waiting in the cold for a very long time. And they're still waiting.